My name is Madison, and I am 30 years old. A week after giving birth, my husband forced me to take the bus home in a freezing Chicago blizzard while he drove my Rolls-Royce to a family dinner. Holding my newborn son with my surgical incision bleeding through my coat, I dialed the one number I swore I would never call again. Dad, please save me and your grandson. I had no idea that this single phone call would unleash a corporate war that would leave my husband and his family begging on their knees. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who mistook your silence for weakness. The sleet was coming down in thick, relentless sheets, slicing through the thin fabric of my wool coat like tiny, icy knives. I huddled under the rusted metal awning of the bus stop on Michigan Avenue, desperately trying to shield my newborn son Leo from the biting wind. The pain in my abdomen was a blinding white-hot agony. I had undergone an emergency cesarean section just 7 days ago. Now a warm, terrifying dampness was spreading across my lower stomach, soaking into my surgical bandages and staining my clothes. I was bleeding heavily, but I could not afford to pass out. I had to keep Leo warm against my chest. Through the gray haze of the winter storm, a vehicle approached the curb. It was not the city bus I desperately needed. It was a pristine midnight blue Rolls-Royce Cullinan. The massive luxury SUV glided through the slush with arrogant ease, slowing down just enough as it passed my bus stop. The tinted passenger windows were rolled down slightly, letting out a blast of warm air and the unmistakable sound of popping champagne corks. Inside, I saw them clearly. My husband Derek was behind the wheel, looking incredibly smug in his tailored tuxedo. In the passenger seat sat his mother Patricia, holding a crystal flute and adjusting her diamond necklace. In the back were his sister Vanessa and her husband DeAndre, an African-American man who constantly bragged about his cryptocurrency investments. They were laughing loudly, completely oblivious or entirely indifferent to the fact that I was freezing to death on the sidewalk just 10 feet away from them. I pulled out my phone with trembling, numb fingers and hit Derek's contact name. He answered on the third ring, the sound of upbeat jazz music blaring in the background. "What is it, Madison?" Derek snapped, his voice dripping with intense annoyance. "I am freezing, Derek," I gasped, trying to keep my teeth from chattering loud enough to wake the baby. "My incision is bleeding. You drove right past us. Please turn the car around and pick us up." I heard Patricia scoff loudly in the background. "Tell her to stop whining," she yelled over the music. Derek sighed heavily into the speaker. "Do not be dramatic, Madison. The doctor explicitly said you need to walk to get your strength back and lose that postpartum weight. Taking the bus builds character. But you have a massive SUV." I pleaded, gripping Leo tighter against my chest. "There is plenty of room for us." Derek laughed coldly. "Absolutely not. I have to take my new corporate perk car to celebrate my upcoming promotion to senior finance director. We are heading to a highly exclusive dinner, and I cannot have you dragging down the mood with your complaining." DeAndre chimed in from the back seat, shouting, "Yeah, tell your IT wife to catch a cab." Derek chuckled. "Do not embarrass me, Madison. Take the bus home and have dinner ready by 9. He hung up. The line went dead, leaving me listening to the howling wind. A bitter, agonizing realization washed over me. Derek actually believed the Rolls-Royce was a reward from his finance firm. He had no idea about the truth. That car was not a corporate perk. It was a push present I had purchased for myself entirely in cash. For the past 5 years, Derek and his family had mocked my career, treating me like a low-level tech support worker, typing away in our spare bedroom. DeAndre always ridiculed my job, calling me a wage slave. They did not know I was a top-tier cybersecurity architect. They did not know I had founded an elite data protection firm, and they certainly did not know that my company had just been acquired by an anonymous tech conglomerate for $150 million. Derek had simply intercepted the delivery of the vehicle that morning, assumed his firm sent it as a surprise bonus, and drove off with his family, leaving me and his newborn son stranded at the hospital discharge doors. Another wave of dizziness hit me stronger this time. The icy world around me tilted violently. The pavement rushed up to meet me, and I collapsed onto the snow-covered concrete, twisting my body at the last second to ensure Leo landed safely on top of my chest. My blurry vision rapidly grew dark at the edges. I could feel the blood pooling against my skin, my energy draining away with every heartbeat. I knew in my heart I was dying. With the last ounce of strength I possessed, I unlocked my phone. I bypassed the recent calls and scrolled down to a contact I had blocked 5 years ago. My father, Richard, was a ruthless Wall Street corporate attorney, and we had not spoken since my wedding. I pressed the green call button, praying he would pick up. He answered instantly, his deep, authoritative voice echoing through the speaker. "Richard speaking," he answered curtly. "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Dad, please save me and your grandson." I dropped the heavy phone into the freezing snow, closed my eyes tightly, and finally let the freezing darkness completely and utterly consume my broken body. The biting Chicago blizzard faded into a sterile, comforting warmth. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoed in my ears. The agonizing tearing sensation in my abdomen had dulled to a heavy ache masked by whatever painkillers coursed through my intravenous line. I shifted my weight on the mattress, realizing immediately this was not a standard hospital bed. The sheets were high thread-count Egyptian cotton, and the room itself looked more like a penthouse suite at the Ritz than a recovery ward at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. My eyes focused on the foot of the bed. Standing there, silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Lake Michigan, was a man I had not spoken to in 5 years. Richard, my father. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that screamed Wall Street. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his posture was as rigid and unyielding as a steel beam. Flanking him were 3 young associates in equally expensive tailored suits, their faces blank, holding thick leather portfolios. There were no tearful reunions. There were no frantic hugs or desperate inquiries about my near-death experience in the snow. My father did not operate on emotion. He operated on leverage. "You are awake," Richard stated, his voice a low, commanding baritone that immediately dominated the room. "Good. The doctor stabilized your hemorrhage. Leo is safe in the neonatal intensive care unit receiving top-tier care. Now look at this." He did not ask how I felt. He simply stepped forward and dropped a thick stack of printed bank statements directly onto my lap. The top page was heavily highlighted in bright neon yellow. I pulled myself up against the plush pillows, wincing as the movement pulled at my fresh stitches. I picked up the paper, my vision still slightly blurry from the severe blood loss. I stared at the account number. It was the joint savings account I shared with Derek. The balance printed at the bottom of the page read $0.00. I blinked hard, shaking my head, certain the heavy medication was playing tricks on my mind. "That is impossible," I whispered, my throat dry and scratchy. "I just checked that balance 2 days ago. There was exactly $200,000 in there." "There was," Richard corrected, crossing his arms over his chest. "Until yesterday morning." Derek executed a series of rapid wire transfers directly into an offshore cryptocurrency exchange platform. He emptied it entirely. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me, far worse than the freezing sleet at the bus stop. That money was not for a luxury vacation or a new house. That exact sum was the deposit required for Leo congenital heart defect surgery scheduled for next month. Derek knew this. We had sat in the cardiologist office together, holding hands, while the doctor explained the severe narrowing of our son's aortic valve. Derek had cried, swearing he would do whatever it took to save our baby boy. Instead, he had maliciously taken the money meant to keep his newborn son alive. "Why would he do this?" I choked out, gripping the paper so hard my knuckles turned white. "He knows Leo needs that critical operation. He knows my basic insurance will not cover the out-of-network specialist." "Because he is a parasite, Madison," Richard replied coldly, stepping closer to the bed. "I warned you 5 years ago when you married that mid-level finance hack. You wanted to play the dutiful, supportive wife. You put your hard-earned tech consulting money into a joint account to stroke his fragile ego. And this is the result." He stole his own son's heart surgery fund to throw into a digital Ponzi scheme. My mind raced, connecting the scattered pieces of the past few weeks. Derek had been spending an inordinate amount of time with his brother-in-law, DeAndre. DeAndre was constantly boasting about his genius blockchain investments, showing up to family dinners wearing designer clothes and driving rented sports cars. He had been pressuring Derek to get in on the ground floor of a new token. Derek had actually stolen our baby lifeline to play crypto bro with DeAndre. "You need to wake up," Richard said, his tone razor sharp, leaving no room for my shock or grief. "I deployed my private investigators the moment you called me from the pavement. Derek did not just leave you bleeding in a blizzard. He deliberately stranded you so he could take the luxury car you bought and play the big shot at his firm dinner. He is siphoning your resources while treating you like absolute garbage." I looked down at the bank statement again. The zeros mocked me. For 5 years, I had hidden my true wealth, pretending to be a basic freelance IT worker, earning a modest salary just to keep Derek from feeling emasculated. I had allowed his mother to insult my clothes. I had allowed his sister to mock my job. I had shrunk myself down to fit into their narrow, pathetic worldview. And in return, my husband had left me to bleed out in the snow while he stole the money meant to save our child. The sadness evaporated, replaced instantly by a suffocating white-hot fury. "What do we do, Dad?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave, the tears drying instantly on my cheeks. Richard finally smiled, a predatory, terrifying expression that I realized I mirrored perfectly. "We destroy them," he stated simply. "We strip them of every asset, every ounce of dignity, and every comfort they think they possess." Before he could detail his aggressive legal strategy, the heavy oak double doors of the VIP suite burst open with a violent echoing crash. Derek stormed into the room, his face flushed red with unhinged rage, his tuxedo jacket wrinkled and smelling faintly of expensive champagne. Right behind him was his mother, Patricia, clutching her gaudy designer handbag, her eyes darting around the lavish, expansive hospital suite in absolute, undisguised shock. Neither of them looked at my pale, exhausted face. Neither of them asked about the newborn baby currently fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. "Are you completely out of your mind, Madison?" Derek screamed, pointing an aggressive, accusing finger at me from the doorway. "Do you have any idea how much a luxury VIP suite at Northwestern costs per night? You are going to completely bankrupt our entire family just because you felt like throwing a tantrum and getting some attention. Get out of that bed right this second before they charge us for another day." Patricia stepped forward, her face twisting into a sneer of pure disgust. "This is exactly what I told you, Derek. She is lazy and manipulative. She could not handle taking a simple bus ride without faking a medical emergency to ruin your special promotion dinner." They stood there shouting and complaining about hospital bills, entirely oblivious to the lethal silence radiating from my father and completely unaware that I now knew exactly what they had stolen. Patricia marched past Richard as if he were simply a highly paid hospital administrator. She threw her hands up, her heavy gold bracelets clanking loudly in the quiet room. "You just could not let him have one night, could you, Madison? One single night to celebrate his hard work. You had to stage this entire dramatic production complete with fake bleeding and a luxury suite just to tear the spotlight away from my son." Derek nodded emphatically, adjusting his collar. "She is right. You have always been insanely jealous of my career trajectory. I told you taking the bus was perfectly safe. You probably scratched open your own incision just to punish me for driving the Rolls-Royce." I stared at them, the sheer audacity of their accusations momentarily paralyzing my vocal cords. Before I could formulate a response, a slow, arrogant clapping echoed from the hallway. DeAndre strolled into the VIP suite, his leather loafers squeaking softly against the polished marble floor. He casually pushed up the sleeve of his tailored blazer, making absolutely certain the overhead lights caught the blinding sparkle of a brand-new diamond-encrusted Rolex sitting heavily on his wrist. "Man, this room is wild," DeAndre chuckled, looking around with a greedy grin. "But Derek is right, Maddie. You are burning through cash we could be leveraging. You stay at home." IT girls really do not grasp the concept of liquid capital. I kept my eyes locked on that watch. The diamonds practically burned my retinas. That Rolex was worth at least $80,000. My baby boy was lying in an incubator 2 floors down, waiting for a heart surgery we supposedly could not afford, and this man was wearing the deposit on his wrist. "Where did you get the money for that watch, DeAndre?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble exactly the way a frightened, confused wife would. Derek stepped in front of DeAndre, puffing out his chest. "I gave it to him, Madison. Well, not for the watch, obviously. That is just a small dividend from the profits. I transferred the $200,000 from our joint account to DeAndre's LLC yesterday morning." Patricia smiled proudly, patting Derek's arm. "My son is a visionary." I gripped the edge of the blanket. "You took the money for Leo's heart surgery. You knew that transfer was due next week." Derek rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "Relax, Madison. You simply do not understand high-level finance. DeAndre has insider access to a guaranteed Web3 crypto investment. The tokens launch publicly on Monday. That $200,000 is going to turn into $2 million overnight. We will pay for the surgery in cash and still have enough left over to buy a vacation home in Cabo. DeAndre is making us millionaires, and you are sitting here crying over temporary liquidity constraints." DeAndre tapped the face of his Rolex. "Guaranteed returns, Maddie. You should be thanking me instead of interrogating your husband. You just stick to resetting passwords and fixing routers. Let the men handle the portfolio." The urge to sit up, rip the IV out of my arm, and wrap the tubing around Derek's throat was so powerful, my muscles physically twitched. I could feel Richard tense beside me. My father was a predator in a bespoke suit, and I knew he was seconds away from signaling his associates to physically throw these parasites out the window. But if I unleashed Richard now, Derek would play the victim. He would hire a sleazy lawyer, claim the crypto investment was a genuine mistake, and drag out a divorce for years while playing the devoted father. I needed them blind. I needed them completely arrogant and stripped of all their defenses. So I swallowed my pride. I slumped back into the pillows, letting my shoulders collapse. I forced a fresh wave of tears into my eyes, letting them spill down my pale cheeks. "I am so sorry," I sobbed, hiding my face in my hands. "I was just so scared." The bleeding would not stop, and I panicked. "You know I am terrible with money, Derek. I just want Leo to be okay. I did not mean to ruin your dinner. Please do not be mad at me. I was just terrified." The tension in the room instantly evaporated. Derek smirked, his ego thoroughly stroked by my pathetic display of submission. He walked over and patted my head exactly the way one might pat a disobedient but amusing dog. "It is fine, Madison. Just stop the hysterics. I will talk to the hospital billing department and get you moved to a standard double room immediately. We cannot afford this VIP nonsense right now, not while our capital is tied up in the blockchain." Patricia let out a huff of vindicated satisfaction. Finally, some sense. "Honestly, I need a coffee after dealing with this melodrama. Derek, DeAndre, come with me. Let us find the cafeteria. I cannot stand the smell of this room for another second." "We will be back later to move your things," Derek instructed, turning his back on me without a second glance. "Do not order any expensive room service." They paraded out of the room, their voices echoing down the hallway as they debated where to get the best espresso. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, plunging the suite back into a sudden, echoing silence. I slowly lowered my hands from my face. The tears stopped instantly. I sat up straight, ignoring the dull ache in my abdomen, and looked at my father. Richard had not moved a single muscle during the entire exchange. His face was a mask of cold, calculating stone, but his dark eyes were gleaming with a dangerous, proud light. "That was a spectacular performance," Richard murmured, stepping forward. "For a moment, I thought you had actually lost your nerve." "Never interrupt an enemy while they are making a mistake," I replied, my voice dropping back to its normal steady pitch. "They think I am a terrified, helpless incubator. Let them keep thinking that until it is too late." Richard nodded slowly. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket. He leaned down and seamlessly slipped a sleek, matte black, heavily encrypted USB drive directly under my pillow. "Your company acquisition funds just cleared the international escrow accounts." Richard said, his tone utterly devoid of emotion but laced with lethal intent. $150 million, Madison. Clean, untraceable by their amateur accountants, and entirely yours. I rested my hand on the pillow, feeling the solid shape of the drive beneath the fabric. The technology I had built from the ground up had just paid off. I was no longer just a mother fighting for her son. I was a corporation. Richard buttoned his jacket, signaling to his associates that it was time to leave. He paused at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. Are we hunting them down or what? We do not just hunt them down, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of the fear I had performed just moments ago. We burn their entire kingdom to the ground. Richard gave a single, sharp nod of approval before turning and vanishing down the pristine hospital corridor. 2 days later, I was discharged. I secured Leo in his infant car seat and took a private car service back to the suburban home I shared with Derek. I knew I needed to maintain my cover, so I prepared myself mentally for whatever environment awaited me. But nothing could have prepared me for the absolute squalor my in-laws had left behind. I pushed open the front door and was instantly hit by the stench of stale cigar smoke and rotting takeout. Patricia had clearly hosted a victory party for Derek. Empty bottles of my expensive imported Chardonnay littered the marble kitchen island. DeAndre had tracked thick, dark mud across my white Persian rugs, and Vanessa had somehow managed to leave a trail of discarded designer shopping bags from the foyer all the way up the sweeping staircase. They had treated my home like a cheap hotel while I was recovering from major surgery. I felt a surge of violent anger tight in my chest, but I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. I carefully carried Leo up to his nursery, settled him safely into his crib, and immediately strapped my healing abdomen into a tight postpartum binder. It was time to go to work. I grabbed a bucket of cleaning supplies and walked directly into Derek's home office. He always kept this room off limits, claiming his highly sensitive financial documents required absolute privacy. I closed the heavy mahogany door behind me and turned the lock. The moment the deadbolt clicked, the submissive, terrified wife vanished. I set the cleaning bucket down and pulled a sleek, customized digital toolkit from beneath the sponges and polish. They loved to mock my low-level IT job. They were about to find out exactly why a multinational conglomerate had paid $150 million for my proprietary surveillance architecture. I moved with quiet, practiced efficiency. First, I extracted a microscopic audio transmitter no larger than a grain of rice and adhered it directly beneath the lip of his desk. Next, I pulled his desktop tower forward. I inserted a hardware keystroke logger disguised as a standard USB adapter into the back port, bridging it with his keyboard cable. Every single password, every email, every private message he typed from now on would be silently intercepted and forwarded directly to my secure cloud server. Then came the data extraction. I plugged my father's encrypted USB drive into the main port and initiated a rapid hard drive clone. A progress bar appeared on my tablet indicating the transfer would take exactly 6 minutes. I knew Derek's security would be pathetic, and I was right. A man with an ego that massive always uses a predictable password. It took me less than 10 seconds to bypass his lock screen, using his own birth date and the name of his college fraternity. While the digital clone ran, I knew I needed to search the physical space. In corporate espionage, the most damning evidence is rarely kept on a connected hard drive. Amateurs always hide the things they are truly terrified of losing in the physical world. I grabbed a microfiber cloth and began wiping down the baseboards to maintain my cover story just in case someone walked in. As I swept the cloth near the floor, I noticed something strange about the heavy brass HVAC vent in the corner. The bottom left screw was entirely stripped, its metal edges shiny and worn down. Derek did not know how to hold a screwdriver, let alone perform HVAC maintenance. I slipped a flathead attachment from my toolkit and quietly removed the grate. Reaching my hand into the dark, dusty duct my fingers brushed against thick, heavy paper, I pulled it out. It was a dense manila folder, unmarked and sealed with a string tie. I opened the flap and began to read the documents inside. The blood drained from my face and the room seemed to spin. The first document was a half-drafted post-nuptial agreement. It was aggressively comprehensive, deliberately designed to strip me of all marital assets, force me to assume total liability for any debts accrued during the marriage, and leave me with absolutely zero spousal support. But the second document was what made my heart stop beating. It was a petition for emergency full custody of Leo. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes catching on the highlighted phrases Derek's lawyer had prepared. The petition cited me as an unfit mother. It falsely claimed I was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis, prone to violent outbursts, and completely incapable of caring for an infant. Derek was using my terrifying collapse at the bus stop, the collapse he intentionally caused, as documented medical proof of my supposed mental instability. He was building a bulletproof legal narrative to throw me into a psychiatric ward, steal my baby, and take every dime I possessed. The USB drive chirped quietly, signaling the clone was complete. I shoved the post-nuptial agreement and the custody petition back into the manila folder, shoved the folder deep into the air vent, and rapidly screwed the brass grate back into place. I ripped the USB drive from the computer, tucked it into my bra, and grabbed my cleaning cloth just as heavy footsteps pounded up the hardwood stairs. The handle rattled aggressively. Madison Derek barked from the hallway. "Open this door." I unlocked it immediately, dropping my shoulders and adopting a meek, apologetic expression. "I was just dusting your desk, Derek," I said softly. "I know you like it kept pristine." He shoved past me, practically vibrating with nervous energy. He was clutching a crisp, white legal document in his right hand. He looked at me with an expression of performative pity, shaking his head slowly. "Madison, we need to have a serious talk," Derek said, using the patronizing tone of a disappointed parent. "The hospital administration called me this morning. They are deeply concerned about your mental state. You checked yourself into a room we cannot afford, you made wild accusations against my family, and you are clearly not living in reality right now." I looked down at my shoes, forcing a small, pathetic sniffle. "I am just so tired," I whispered. "I know you are," he said smoothly, stepping closer. "That is why I had my firm's legal team draft this." He shoved the document toward my chest. "It is a medical power of attorney. It temporarily grants me full legal authority to make all medical and financial decisions for you and Leo. While you recover from this unfortunate postpartum episode, you need to sign it right now, Madison. It is for your own good." I looked at the document. It was the final nail in my coffin, the exact piece of paper he needed to execute his custody theft. I looked up at Derek, forcing my eyes to brim with grateful, submissive tears. "You are right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I need you to take control. You always know what is best for our family." Derek smiled a sickening, triumphant grin. He patted my shoulder and pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the page. "Sign it, Maddie. Let me take the burden off your shoulders." I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out my favorite writing instrument. It was a heavy silver Mont Blanc pen. Derek recognized it immediately as the cheap anniversary gift he had given me 3 years ago. What he did not know was that I had replaced the internal ink cartridge months ago. It was now filled with elite military-grade disappearing ink, a specific formula used in high-level corporate espionage that completely vanished from paper after exactly 48 hours, leaving absolutely zero trace residue. I clicked the pen open, smiled warmly at my treacherous husband, and boldly signed my name on the dotted line. Derek snatched the paper from my hands. He blew on the ink, a victorious grin spreading across his face. Sliding the medical power of attorney into a pristine manila envelope, he was unaware that within 48 hours, that page would be entirely blank. He gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder, told me to finish cleaning his office, and strutted out. I picked up my microfiber cloth and resumed wiping down his desk, a chilling smile touching my lips. Exactly 1 week later, Patricia hosted Leo's christening at her pretentious country club. As the mother of the child being baptized, I had been entirely excluded from every single aspect of the planning. Patricia hijacked the event, turning a sacred milestone for my newborn son into a networking mixer for her wealthy socialite friends and Derek's corporate colleagues. I was not allowed to select the invitations, choose the catering menu, or pick the floral arrangements. The ultimate insult came in the form of my wardrobe. Patricia handed me a plastic shopping bag containing a hideous mustard yellow polyester dress. She claimed with a dramatic sigh that due to my reckless hospital stay, the family budget was extremely tight. She insisted I wear the cheap garment so guests would understand our financial sacrifices. I put it on without a word of protest. It fit terribly, sagging at the shoulders and clinging to my healing incision. At the country club, the contrast was violently deliberate. While I stood looking like a neglected charity case, Vanessa made a grand, sweeping entrance wearing a custom-tailored emerald green silk couture gown. Dripping in diamonds, she paraded around the crystal-lit ballroom, soaking up compliments, while ignoring her actual nephew. I stood quietly near the extravagant dessert table, cradling Leo against my chest. My son looked beautiful in the heirloom white christening gown my grandmother had made. As I rocked him gently in my arms, I watched Patricia hold court with a group of the club's elite wives. She deliberately raised her voice, ensuring her words carried over the music. "It is just so draining," Patricia lamented, placing a manicured hand over her heart. "My poor Derek works 80 hours a week at the firm, securing his promotion, and he comes home to absolute chaos. Madison simply refuses to contribute. The medical bills from her little panic attack at the hospital are going to be a massive financial burden on my son. She just takes, and Derek is too generous to put his foot down." The wealthy women surrounding her cast pitiful, condescending glances in my direction. They whispered behind their champagne flutes, shaking their heads at the tragic burden Derek had to carry. I kept my head bowed, projecting the exact image of a broken, submissive wife they wanted to see. I softly kissed Leo's forehead, unfazed by their toxic theater. Across the ballroom, another performance was taking place. DeAndre had cornered 3 of Derek's senior partners from the finance firm. These distinguished men held the key to Derek's impending promotion. DeAndre was aggressively pitching his Web3 crypto token, his voice booming with unearned confidence. He flashed his diamond-encrusted Rolex, gesturing wildly as he threw around buzzwords like decentralized finance and guaranteed yields. The senior partners looked skeptical, their eyes narrowing at DeAndre's aggressive sales tactics. One of them, a silver-haired and arrogant man named Arthur, challenged him directly, asking about the actual liquid backing of the token. DeAndre practically beamed. He pulled a sleek tablet from his jacket pocket, proudly shoving the screen into Arthur's face. "We have absolute stability," DeAndre boasted loudly, making sure Derek heard him from across the room. "Look at that liquidity pool. $200,000 in pure, unadulterated capital backing the initial coin offering. We are locked, loaded, and ready to disrupt the entire market. My investors trust me because I produce undeniable results." My stomach turned as I looked at the bright green numbers on his tablet screen. It was exactly the $200,000 stolen directly from Leo's congenital heart surgery fund. DeAndre was using my baby's literal lifeline as a prop to impress a group of wealthy corporate executives. Derek stood a few feet away, nursing a scotch, looking at DeAndre with absolute admiration and pride. He truly believed he had made a genius financial move. I carefully adjusted little Leo in my arms, freeing up my right hand. I retreated to a secluded table, tucked behind a massive arrangement of white hydrangeas. I pulled my phone from my cheap polyester pocket. To anyone watching, I looked like a sad, socially awkward wallflower, mindlessly scrolling through social media. In reality, I was initiating a digital strike that would shatter their reality. I opened a highly encrypted application on my phone, instantly routing my connection through a secure offshore virtual private network. I accessed the direct portal for the Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of the Whistleblower. I uploaded the deeply compromising files I had extracted from Derek's cloned hard drive. I attached the blockchain wallet addresses, the digital transaction receipts linking Derek to the offshore transfer, and the fraudulent LLC registration documents DeAndre had filed to hide his unregulated securities offerings. I typed out a meticulously documented summary of the federal wire fraud scheme, detailing exactly how the funds were misappropriated to illegally inflate the perceived liquidity of a fraudulent cryptocurrency token. The evidence was bulletproof structured, with the exact terminology required to trigger an immediate aggressive federal investigation. I looked up from my screen just in time to see DeAndre enthusiastically clinking his champagne glass against Arthur's tumbler, convinced he was the smartest man in the room. I looked down at my phone, a cold, ruthless calm, settling deep into my bones. I pressed the submit button, watching the progress bar turn green as the massive data packet was successfully transmitted to federal authorities. They had stolen my son's future. Now I was burning their house down. The country club facade finally ended after 5 excruciating hours of forced smiles and polite nods. Derek drove us home in complete silence, far too absorbed in calculating the success of DeAndre's pitch to notice my total lack of conversation. The moment we walked through the front door, he announced he was exhausted from carrying the social weight of our family and went straight upstairs to bed. He did not ask if I needed help with Leo. He did not ask how I was feeling. He simply vanished into the master bedroom. I waited until the rhythmic sound of his snoring drifted down the hallway. I settled Leo into his bassinet, triple-checking his heart monitor before making my way down the stairs. The house was dead quiet. I sat in the center of the dark living room, the only light radiating from the harsh, cold glow of my dual monitors. I plugged the cloned drive into my terminal. Derek's digital life laid bare before me. The initial layer of security was a joke, but he had hidden a secondary partitioned drive behind a slightly more complex firewall. It took my decryption software exactly 12 minutes to crack it. The progress bar hit 100%. The partitioned drive snapped open, hundreds of folders cascaded across my screen. I did not care about his browsing history or his petty office complaints. I went straight for the financial ledgers. I needed to map the exact trajectory of the $200,000 he stole from Leo. I opened a folder labeled with DeAndre's initials. Inside was a chaotic mess of spreadsheets, screenshots of cryptocurrency charts, and exported chat logs. I cross-referenced the date of the wire transfer from our joint account with the blockchain ledger logs DeAndre had sent Derek. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I traced the digital footprint. DeAndre had claimed at the country club that the money was sitting in a secure liquidity pool, generating guaranteed returns. He had shoved that tablet in the senior partners' faces, bragging about stability. I pulled up the destination wallet address on the decentralized exchange. The screen populated with the transaction history. The $200,000 never made it to a liquidity pool. According to the unalterable public ledger of the blockchain, the exact moment the funds cleared the exchange, they were instantly seized by an automated smart contract. DeAndre had severely over-leveraged his portfolio on a highly volatile altcoin. The market had crashed the night before the transfer. DeAndre was hit with a massive margin call. He had begged Derek for an immediate cash injection to prevent his entire portfolio from being liquidated. Derek wired my baby's heart surgery fund directly into a burning building. The exchange swallowed the $200,000 to cover DeAndre's bad bet. The balance was zero. It was not tied up. It was not temporarily inaccessible. It was completely, irrevocably erased. A cold, metallic dread coated my throat. My son was lying upstairs, his heart struggling to pump blood through his tiny body, and his father had burned his only lifeline to save his idiot brother-in-law from a margin call. I sat perfectly still, letting the sheer magnitude of the betrayal wash over me. I did not cry. Crying was a useless biological function right now. I needed leverage. If the $200,000 was gone, where was DeAndre getting the capital to keep pitching his fake tokens? Where was he getting the money for an $80,000 Rolex? I opened the next folder. This one was heavily encrypted and disguised under a generic system file name. I ran it through my brute force software. When the contents finally decrypted, the breath caught in my lungs. I was staring at the internal client escrow accounts for Derek's wealth management firm. These were highly restricted files. Derek had bypassed his firm's compliance protocols to export them. I opened a master spreadsheet and began comparing the firm's official client balances with a hidden column Derek had titled Diverted Yields. The rabbit hole did not just go deeper, it plummeted straight into federal prison. Derek had not just stolen from me. He was systematically embezzling massive sums of money from his own senior partners and their high net worth clients. He had created dozens of phantom vendor accounts and spoofed digital invoices. He was siphoning client funds, laundering the money through shell corporations, and feeding it directly into DeAndre's failing cryptocurrency schemes to cover the ongoing losses. DeAndre was not a financial genius. He was a gaping black hole of debt, and Derek was committing aggressive multi-million-dollar corporate fraud to prop up the illusion of their success. The Rolex on DeAndre's wrist was not a dividend. It was bought with stolen client money. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows across the living room walls. Derek was planning to use the medical power of attorney and the custody petition to lock me in a psychiatric facility. He needed me declared legally incompetent so I could never testify against him, and so he could liquidate my remaining personal assets to cover his tracks before his firm's auditors realized the escrow accounts were bleeding dry. Suddenly, a sharp, bright ping pierced the silence of the living room. On the table beside my monitors, the cloned iPad I had synced to Derek's Apple ID illuminated. A calendar notification popped up on the lock screen. Apartment viewing with Amber, tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. I grabbed the tablet and swiped open the notification. There was a PDF document attached to the calendar invite. I clicked the file. It was a luxury residential lease agreement. The property was a stunning 3-bedroom penthouse suite located in the most expensive high-rise in downtown Chicago. The monthly rent was astronomical. I scrolled down to the bottom of the digital document. There were 2 names typed out on the tenant's signature lines: Derek Wilson and Amber Hayes. I stared at the name. Amber was a junior associate at Derek's firm. She was 24 years old, blonde, and constantly liking his posts on professional networking sites. The entire picture snapped into brutal, crystal-clear focus. Derek was not just trying to steal my money and my son to save himself from financial ruin. He was actively setting up an entirely new life. He planned to commit me to a psychiatric ward, take full custody of Leo, secure his promotion using embezzled funds, and move his young mistress into a downtown penthouse paid for by my suffering. I slowly set the iPad down. I looked back at my main monitor, staring at the hard evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. They thought I was a fragile, hysterical woman they could easily dispose of. They had no idea I was the architect of their impending destruction. I opened a direct encrypted communication channel to my father's private security team. It was time to introduce Amber to the game. The following morning, the Chicago skyline was hidden behind a thick layer of steel-gray clouds. I stood across the street from the shimmering glass facade of the Pinnacle, the most exclusive luxury high-rise in the downtown district. I had traded my typical suburban mother wardrobe for a sharp-tailored black suit carrying a heavy silver Pelican case that screamed elite corporate tech support. My father's private security team had effortlessly arranged my cover identity. According to the building management's heavily fabricated digital calendar, I was an independent network security auditor dispatched by their property management conglomerate to run a mandatory diagnostic on their internal servers. I walked through the revolving glass doors, letting the quiet hum of wealth wash over me. The lobby smelled of fresh orchids and expensive leather. A concierge in a pristine uniform looked up from his marble desk, offering a polite but scrutinizing smile. I handed him my forged credentials and a laminated work order, speaking in a clipped, authoritative tone that brooked absolutely no questioning. He glanced at the paperwork, nodded, and handed me a temporary keycard, granting full access to the back offices. The leasing center was located on the second floor, hidden away from the residents. I swiped my card and entered the quiet, empty suite. The property manager had stepped out for lunch exactly as my father's operatives had promised. I locked the heavy glass door behind me and moved directly to the main terminal sitting on the manager's desk. I popped open the latches of my Pelican case, extracting a customized interceptor drive. I plugged it into the back of the terminal, and watched as the building's supposedly secure firewall crumbled in under 40 seconds. The entire leasing database lay open before me. I quickly filtered the search parameters, typing in Derek's name and the apartment number listed on the calendar invite from his cloned iPad, Penthouse 4A. The digital file loaded instantly. I scanned the initial terms. It was a 2-year lease at $14,000 a month. The primary tenant was listed as Amber Hayes, with Derek Wilson listed as the secondary occupant. But as I scrolled down to the financial verification section, a glaring red flag caught my eye. The system showed that Derek's initial application had been subjected to a manual override. I needed to see the hard copies. Amateurs always leave a physical paper trail. I stepped away from the terminal and moved to the massive bank of locking filing cabinets lining the back wall. Using a slim titanium tension wrench from my toolkit, I bypassed the lock in seconds. I pulled open the top drawer, quickly flipping through the alphabetized folders until I found the thick file labeled Penthouse 4A. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the manager's desk. The truth was infinitely worse than I had calculated. Derek had not simply rented a luxury apartment for his 24-year-old mistress. His initial credit check was stapled to the back of the application, and it was a complete bloodbath. DeAndre's catastrophic cryptocurrency margin calls had not just wiped out Leo's surgery fund, they had completely decimated Derek's personal credit. He had secretly taken out 3 massive high-interest personal loans to cover the initial blockchain losses months ago, and he was defaulting on all of them. His credit score was practically non-existent. The building management had flatly rejected his application. He was drowning in debt, completely unable to secure a luxury lease on his own merit. I flipped to the final page of the lease agreement, the guarantor section. My blood turned to absolute ice. Staring back at me from the bottom of the page was my own signature. Derek had forged my name. He had used my pristine credit history, my spotless financial record, and my hidden consulting wealth to guarantee a $14,000 a month penthouse for the woman he was sleeping with. He had submitted altered tax documents showing my income to the leasing office, tying me legally and financially to this extravagant property. Every single page was an intricate fraud. If he stopped paying the rent, which he inevitably would given his impending financial collapse, the building management would legally come after me. He was weaponizing my financial stability to fund his infidelity while simultaneously planning to have me committed to a psychiatric ward. He was essentially making me buy the bed he planned to sleep in with another woman. The sheer sociopathic perfection of his plan was almost impressive. He intended to lock me away, steal my child, destroy my reputation, and leave me completely on the hook for his mistress's exorbitant rent. I pulled out a portable scanner from my case and rapidly digitized every single page of the physical file, uploading the high-resolution images directly to my encrypted cloud server. I tucked the folder back into the filing cabinet, locked the drawer, and meticulously erased my digital footprint from the manager's terminal. I packed away my equipment, smoothed the lapels of my suit, and unlocked the glass door to leave. As I stepped out of the leasing office and into the carpeted hallway, I collided hard with a wall of overpowering sweet perfume and multiple designer shopping bags. "Watch where you are going," a sharp nasal voice snapped. I stepped back, stabilizing my Pelican case. Standing in front of me was a young woman balancing 3 heavy shopping bags and an iced coffee. She had long, perfectly curled blonde hair, dramatic eyelash extensions, and was wearing a skin-tight athleisure outfit that looked entirely impractical for the bitter cold Chicago weather. I recognized her instantly from the firm's networking profiles. Amber Hayes. She stopped adjusting her bags and actually looked at my face. Her annoyed expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of immediate recognition. She looked me up and down, taking in my severe black suit and the heavy equipment case, her manicured lips curving into a slow, malicious sneer. "Wait a minute," Amber said, taking a deliberate step closer. Her eyes dragged over me with undisguised contempt. "I know exactly who you are. I have seen the pictures Derek keeps in his phone. You are the crazy, broke wife." I stood my ground, my expression hardening into a mask of total indifference. I did not say a single word, letting the silence stretch tightly between us. Amber laughed a high, mocking sound that echoed in the quiet hallway. She shifted her iced coffee to her other hand, looking at me with absolute pity. I cannot believe you actually came here. What are you doing checking up on him? You really are as pathetic as he says. But I guess you have to do something with your time before Derek puts you in an asylum next week. An asylum next week, I repeated, letting the cruel words hang in the sterile, air-conditioned hallway of the Pinnacle. I did not flinch. I did not scream or attempt to physically assault her. I simply looked at this 22-year-old girl clutching her iced coffee and stolen designer bags. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her entire reality, including her fraudulent lease agreement, was currently sitting on my secure cloud server, waiting to be handed to a federal prosecutor. Good luck with the rent, Amber, I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of emotion. I hear federal asset freezes can really ruin a credit score. I walked past her without another word, leaving her standing frozen in confusion, and took the elevator down to the lobby. The trap was fully set. Now I just had to wait for the trigger to snap. It did not take long. The beautiful thing about unregulated, decentralized finance is the absolute ruthless speed of its destruction. At exactly 3:14 a.m. on Thursday morning, I was sitting in my dark home office, watching the live blockchain nodes on my secondary monitor. I had set up custom algorithmic alerts for DeAndre's specific smart contract. Suddenly, the screen flashed a brilliant violet red. The developers behind DeAndre's supposedly guaranteed Web3 project executed a textbook rug pull. In a fraction of a second, the anonymous creators unlocked the liquidity pool and drained every single penny of real capital, transferring the funds to an untraceable offshore tumbler. The token's value plummeted from an artificially pumped peak straight down to absolute zero. The trading chart looked like a flat line on a hospital monitor. The official Twitter account vanished. The Discord server was deleted. $200,000 of my son's surgery money, along with millions in embezzled corporate client funds, vaporized into the digital ether. My phone vibrated so violently, it nearly rattled off the desk. The family group chat exploded into absolute, unmitigated chaos. Derek, DeAndre, pick up the phone right now. Derek. The chart is showing zero. The investor portal is down. Pick up the damn phone. Vanessa, DeAndre is throwing up in the master bathroom. What is going on? Why are people messaging him on Twitter saying they are calling the police? Patricia, Derek, fix this. Tell your firm to reverse the transfer. Call the bank, Derek. You cannot reverse a blockchain transaction. Mom, DeAndre, I swear to God I am coming over there. I watched the digital panic unfold in real time, calmly sipping my black coffee. They were trapped in a burning building of their own making, and the exits were securely locked. I casually walked downstairs as the sun came up and began preparing a bottle for Leo. At exactly 7 a.m., the front door violently crashed open. Patricia and Vanessa practically tumbled into the foyer, looking like they had aged a decade overnight. Vanessa was still wearing her silk pajamas, her face blotchy and tear-stained, aggressively clutching her designer purse as if federal agents were about to seize it from her hands. Patricia's usually immaculate hair was disheveled, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. Madison! Patricia shrieked, marching into the kitchen and slapping her palms down on the marble island. Put that bottle down. We have a catastrophic family emergency. I slowly screwed the lid onto the bottle, maintaining the vacant, obedient expression I had perfected over the last 5 years. What is wrong, Patricia? You look unwell. DeAndre has been targeted by hackers, Vanessa sobbed hysterically, pacing the kitchen floor and chewing on her manicured nails. They stole his entire investment fund. The investors are calling our house. They are threatening to sue him. They are going to take the country club membership and the cars. Madison, it is a temporary liquidity crisis, but we need capital right this second to hold off the lawyers. Patricia commanded, pointing a sharp, aggressive finger at my chest. Your mother left you that ridiculous childhood home in the suburbs when she died. It is paid off. You are going to call the bank this morning and take out a second mortgage. You are going to wire the maximum equity loan directly to DeAndre's LLC to cover his margin calls. I stared at her, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated delusion. Patricia genuinely believed I was a destitute orphan who had inherited a worthless, modest house from a fictitious dead mother. She had no idea my father was Richard the billionaire currently sitting in a penthouse suite downtown, and she certainly had no idea I did not own the imaginary property she was demanding I mortgage. "I cannot do that, Patricia," I said softly, looking down at the floor to hide my calculating eyes. "That house is not liquid." "You selfish, useless girl!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking with fury. "My son took you in when you had nothing. DeAndre is a visionary who just hit a bump in the road. You owe this family your absolute loyalty. You will mortgage that property today, or I swear to you." Before she could finish her threat, the heavy oak door connecting the garage to the kitchen flew open. Derek stormed into the room. He looked entirely deranged. His custom suit jacket was missing. His tie was ripped open, and his eyes were heavily bloodshot. He smelled of stale alcohol, cold sweat, and pure, unadulterated terror. He knew the firm's auditors would be at his desk in less than an hour, looking for the missing client escrow funds. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long, aggressive strides. He grabbed me roughly by the wrist, his grip bruising and desperate. The facade of the polished finance executive was completely gone, replaced by a cornered, dangerous predator. "You are going to sign that house over to DeAndre's LLC today." "Madison." Derek snarled, his hot breath hitting my face. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a lethal, trembling whisper. "You are going to give us the collateral, or I am calling the psychiatric ward to have you committed right now. I have the power of attorney. I will lock you in a padded room. I will take Leo, and you will never see the sun again. Do you understand me? Do you understand me?" His grip tightened on my wrist, the pressure escalating until my bones ground together. His bloodshot eyes were wild, radiating a manic, cornered energy. He was sweating through his expensive dress shirt, reeking of stale scotch and impending ruin. He knew his firm's internal auditors would be at his desk in less than an hour, searching for the missing client escrow funds. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic, allowing a pool of tears to form in my eyes. I looked down at the kitchen floor, letting my body tremble just enough to sell the illusion of a completely broken, defeated woman. "Okay," I whispered, my voice intentionally cracking. "Okay, Derek. I will sign it. Just please do not take Leo. Please do not lock me away." "Do." Derek scoffed, a disgusting sound of pure contempt. He released my wrist, practically throwing my arm back at me. He adjusted his collar, his chest puffing out as he reclaimed his delusion of absolute authority. "That is what I thought," he sneered. Patricia clapped her hands together, a triumphant, predatory smile stretching across her face. "Finally, some obedience. Honestly, Madison, it should not take the threat of an asylum to make you support your own family." Vanessa ignored me entirely, rushing over to DeAndre, who was pacing frantically near the refrigerator. DeAndre was a complete mess. His phone was vibrating nonstop, emitting a relentless barrage of incoming messages. "They are threatening to come to the house, Derek," DeAndre stammered, wiping a thick layer of sweat from his forehead. "The Discord channel is doxing my address. We need the collateral registered to the LLC right now. I need to show them proof of liquid assets, or they are going to file federal wire fraud charges by noon." "We are going to a notary right now," Derek commanded. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Get the paperwork, now." "I have a standard commercial property transfer template on my computer." I lied, softly wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "I can print it." "Do it. Fast," Derek snapped. I walked up the stairs, my head bowed in submission. The moment I was out of their sight, the trembling stopped entirely. My posture straightened. I entered my office, locked the door, and logged into my secure, encrypted portal. My father's elite team of corporate litigators had not spent the last 48 hours sleeping. They had been drafting a masterpiece of absolute financial devastation. I sent the file to the printer. The document was 86 pages of incredibly dense, suffocating legal jargon. The cover page read, Commercial Real Estate Quitclaim and Asset Transfer. It looked exactly like a standard, albeit lengthy, property reassignment. But buried deep within the labyrinth of clauses, indemnifications, and subsections was the actual mechanism. It was an ironclad assumption of commercial liability and debt reassignment contract. I stacked the warm, freshly printed pages, slid them into a thick manila envelope, and walked back downstairs. The car ride to the notary was suffocating. Derek drove erratically, aggressively, weaving through morning traffic. DeAndre sat in the passenger seat, his leg bouncing with enough force to shake the entire luxury sedan. He kept looking over his shoulder, paranoid that an angry crypto investor was tailing them. I sat quietly in the back seat, cradling the manila envelope against my chest like a frightened child holding a shield. We pulled into a bleak, fluorescent-lit strip mall. Derek had chosen a cheap 24-hour shipping and printing store that offered walk-in notary services. He wanted this done fast, away from actual bank executives who might ask probing questions. We walked into the store. The air smelled of cheap toner and stale coffee. A bored woman with thick glasses named Brenda sat behind the counter stamping shipping labels. "We need a notary," Derek demanded, slapping his driver's license on the glass counter. "Commercial property transfer. Fast." Brenda sighed, pulling out her heavy logbook and her official seal. "Let me see the documents and everyone's identification." I slid the thick stack of papers across the counter. Derek and DeAndre practically shoved their licenses at the woman. I picked up a pen, my hand intentionally shaking. I looked up at Derek, letting my eyes widen with manufactured panic. "Derek, is this really necessary?" I asked, my voice trembling perfectly. "It is an 80-page document. Should we at least read the transfer clauses? What if I lose the house forever?" Derek rolled his eyes, his patience entirely evaporated. He leaned over the counter, invading my personal space. "You do not understand finance, Madison. You do not understand corporate structuring. It is standard boilerplate jargon. Stop stalling and sign your name on the guarantor line so I can fix this family's problems." "I am the managing director of the LLC," DeAndre interrupted loudly, snatching a second pen from the cup holder. "I need to sign as the primary beneficiary. Give me the signature pages." DeAndre aggressively flipped past 85 pages of meticulously drafted legal ruin. He did not read a single sentence. He did not even glance at the subheaders. He flipped straight to the back, found the lines marked primary beneficiary and managing member, and hastily scribbled his signature. Derek snatched the packet next. "I am signing as the executing guarantor for the LLC," he stated proudly, wanting his name on the document to ensure he had legal control over the supposedly newly acquired asset. He slashed his signature across the bottom of the page, utterly convinced of his own brilliance. I took the pen. I signed exactly where Richard's lawyers had indicated, executing my role as the transferring party. Brenda the notary stamped the pages, completely indifferent to the multi-million-dollar catastrophe occurring in front of her face. She logged our identification cards, handed us our copies, and returned to her shipping labels. DeAndre snatched his copy of the document, letting out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. He immediately pulled out his phone, dialing a number. "Yeah, it is DeAndre. I have the collateral, a fully paid-off residential property just transferred to the LLC's books. The liquidity is secured. Tell the Discord to back off." Derek turned to me, his expression twisting into absolute disgust. The facade of the desperate husband was gone. He had what he wanted. He had the power of attorney, and now he believed he had my house. "Take an Uber home," Derek commanded coldly, "and start packing your bags. We are done." They walked out of the store, leaving me standing alone under the flickering fluorescent lights. I watched through the plate glass window as they climbed into Derek's car and sped out of the parking lot, celebrating their genius victory. I looked down at my copy of the freshly stamped documents. A slow, chilling smile finally broke across my face. The documents were never a mortgage. I did not own that house. My father's holding company did, making any transfer I signed completely void, but their signatures were very real. By signing as the managing member and executing guarantor of the receiving LLC, DeAndre and Derek had just legally bound themselves to a defunct offshore shell company my father's firm had acquired years ago. They had not secured a house. They had just willingly, enthusiastically, and legally assumed full, untransferable personal liability for $80 million in defaulted toxic corporate debt. I watched Derek's taillights vanish into the gray Chicago afternoon before ordering my Uber. The ride back to the affluent suburbs was completely silent. I stared out the window at the passing highway, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the last 5 years finally begin to lift from my shoulders. For half a decade, I had played the role of the meek, easily manipulated housewife, carefully managing Derek's fragile ego and absorbing Patricia's relentless psychological warfare. I had allowed them to believe they held all the power. Now I had handed them the rope, and they had enthusiastically tied their own noose. I walked through the heavy front doors of the house. They falsely believed I owned the property. They thought they had just leveraged to save their fraudulent empire. The silence of the grand foyer was welcoming. I bypassed the living room and went straight upstairs to the nursery. Little Leo was sleeping soundly in his bassinet, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, completely unaware of the digital warfare his mother was waging to secure his future. My father's security team had already dispatched a discreet, pediatric medical transport unit. They were stationed exactly 2 blocks away, parked out of sight, waiting for my encrypted signal to safely relocate my son and his specialized monitoring equipment to the downtown penthouse. I walked down the hall to the master bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. I pulled out my phone, opening the secure portal. I verified that the forged lease documents, the recorded blockchain transaction logs, and the newly notarized $80 million debt assumption contracts were all safely locked in the offshore server. The digital trap was permanently sprung. Now I just had to wait for the physical cleanup crew to arrive. The cleanup crew arrived exactly 40 minutes later. The heavy oak front door swung open, hitting the drywall with a violent, echoing thud. High heels clicked aggressively and rapidly against the hardwood floor of the stairs. Patricia marched into the master bedroom carrying 2 heavy-duty black trash bags. Her face was flushed with absolute unadulterated triumph. She looked at me sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, and a wide, predatory smile stretched across her perfectly manicured face. "Derek just called me from the bank," Patricia announced loudly, dropping the plastic trash bags onto the expensive rug. "The liquidity is secured, DeAndre's investors are satisfied, and Derek's promotion to senior partner is absolutely guaranteed, which means we no longer have to tolerate your miserable, depressing presence in this family for another second." She walked purposefully over to my walk-in closet and violently yanked the doors open. She began grabbing handfuls of my clothing, yanking them off the velvet hangers, and tossing them unceremoniously into the black plastic bags. Silk blouses, maternity jeans, expensive winter coats. She treated them all like contaminated biological waste, shoving them down with her foot. "You should consider yourself incredibly lucky," Patricia continued, her voice practically singing with cruel delight as she cleared out a shelf of sweaters. "Most men would just divorce a broken, financially useless woman and leave her begging on the street. But my Derek is generous. He found a wonderful, highly secure, privately funded psychiatric facility in upstate New York. The medical transport van will be here in exactly 1 hour. The men in the white coats are coming to take you away, Madison. You are going to get the intense, long-term mental help you so clearly need, and Derek is going to take full uncontested custody of his son." I remained perfectly still on the edge of the bed. I did not flinch as my favorite cashmere cardigan was tossed into the garbage. I just watched her perform her vicious victory lap, marveling at the sheer, terrifying depth of her delusion. Patricia stopped packing and turned to face me. She held out her hand, snapping her fingers impatiently. "Give me your phone, your laptop, and the master passwords to your digital accounts. Derek needs to finalize the asset transfer and close out your personal credit lines before you are officially admitted to the ward. We cannot have you trying to contact anyone with your paranoid delusions." I looked at her outstretched hand, then up to her triumphant, expectant eyes. No, Patricia's hand froze in midair. Her victorious smile vanished, replaced instantly by a dark, ugly scowl. "Excuse me," she snapped, her tone dripping with venom. I am not giving you my phone, Patricia, I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I am not giving you my passwords. And I am absolutely not getting into a medical transport van to go to a psychiatric facility. Patricia marched across the room, stopping mere inches from my face. You do not have a choice, she hissed, her breath smelling of strong mints and bitter coffee. You are a legally incompetent, financially destitute dependent. Derek holds your medical power of attorney. You signed those documents at the notary today. You gave us the house. You have nothing left. Hand over the phone right now, or I will personally let the medical orderlies physically restrain you when they arrive. I slowly stood up, bringing myself to eye level with her. You do not own this house, Patricia. Derek does not own this house. And DeAndre certainly does not own this house. The only thing your son and your son-in-law acquired today was $80 million of toxic defaulted corporate debt. Patricia's face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. The absolute audacity of my defiance shattered her carefully maintained socialite facade. She drew her hand back and slapped me viciously across the face. The sharp, violent crack of flesh against flesh echoed loudly in the quiet bedroom. My head snapped to the side, a hot, stinging pain radiating instantly across my cheek. You are nothing but an ugly, useless incubator, Patricia spat, her voice echoing with venomous hatred. You were a vessel for my grandson, and now your purpose is served. You will do exactly what you are told. I stood perfectly still for 3 long seconds. I tasted a faint metallic hint of blood on the inside of my cheek. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my head back to face her. I raised my hand, gently touching the red burning mark on my skin. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I looked her dead in the eyes and pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the small, dark circular dome mounted seamlessly in the corner of the ceiling. You just committed felony assault on a 4K cloud sync security camera. Smile for the police, Patricia. Patricia's face drained of its manic color. Her eyes darted frantically toward the sleek black dome mounted in the corner of the ceiling. The flashing red recording light was unmistakable. The realization of what she had just done hit her like a physical blow. She had physically struck the mother of her grandson on a recorded feed, a feed that was currently safely secured on my off-site servers. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She dropped the black trash bags, grabbed her designer purse, and practically ran out of the bedroom, her heels clicking in a chaotic, desperate retreat down the stairs. The heavy front door slammed shut seconds later. I calmly walked over to my ruined clothing, picked up my favorite cashmere cardigan, and draped it over the chair. The house was blissfully silent. I had exactly 5 hours until the final act of this tragedy commenced. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the front door opened again. Derek strode into the foyer, his chest puffed out, carrying a garment bag from a high-end downtown tailor. He looked completely invigorated, high on the adrenaline of his supposed financial victory. He walked past the nursery without checking on his son and marched directly into the master bedroom. He did not even notice the trash bags on the floor. His mind was entirely consumed by his own impending glory. I am taking the master bathroom, Derek announced, unzipping the garment bag to reveal a pristine, custom-tailored tuxedo. My firm is hosting a massive red carpet gala at the Drake Hotel tonight. The parent company was just acquired in a hostile takeover by an anonymous tech billionaire, and tonight is the official welcome reception. The entire executive board will be there, and I am going to be the center of attention. I remained seated on the edge of the bed, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Are we expected to arrive together? I asked, keeping my voice mild and perfectly submissive. Should I prepare a dress? Derek stopped unbuttoning his shirt and stared at me, a cruel, barking laugh escaping his lips. He looked me up and down, his eyes filled with absolute disdain. You at the Drake Hotel. Do not be ridiculous, Madison. You are entirely too socially awkward and poor to attend a high society event of this magnitude. You do not know how to speak to executives. You do not know which fork to use. You would be an absolute embarrassment to me in front of the new CEO. He turned back to his tuxedo, admiring the silk lapels. I am taking Amber tonight, he stated casually, completely indifferent to the cruelty of his words. She knows how to dress. She knows how to charm a room. She is going to pose as my elegant fiancée. It is a necessary strategic move. The new ownership values aggressive, dynamic leaders with polished personal lives. With Amber on my arm and the stellar financial reports, I just filed my promotion to senior partner is an absolute guarantee. I watched him admire his reflection in the mirror. He genuinely believed his own lies. He believed the $80 million of toxic debt he had just legally assumed under his own signature was actually a brilliant liquidity maneuver that would dazzle his new boss. He was walking directly into a minefield, completely convinced it was a field of gold. "That sounds like a very important evening, Derek," I said softly. "I hope you and Amber have exactly the night you deserve." "I will," Derek sneered, grabbing his toiletry bag and heading into the bathroom. "Have your bags packed and be out of this house by tomorrow morning, Madison. The medical transport was delayed, but my mother is rescheduling it. Do not make me call the police to forcibly remove you." He showered, dressed in his immaculate tuxedo, and spent 20 minutes perfecting his hair. When the black limousine pulled up the driveway to collect him, he did not even look back. He walked out the door, perfectly positioned for his own spectacular execution. The moment the limousine's taillights faded down the street, I stood up. The air in the house felt suddenly lighter, completely purged of his toxic presence. I walked downstairs to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I checked the digital clock on the oven. It was exactly 6 o'clock. 5 minutes later, a heavy knock echoed through the foyer. I unlocked the front door. Standing on the porch was a towering, broad-shouldered man in an impeccable charcoal suit. It was not a medical orderly. It was not an Uber driver. It was a highly trained, secure courier from my father's personal security detail. He stepped aside respectfully. Richard walked through the doorway. My father, the billionaire titan of industry, looked exactly as commanding and terrifying as he did in the boardroom. He did not offer a warm hug or a sentimental greeting. We were well past the point of pleasantries. We were operating in the realm of total war. In his left hand, he carried a thick, opaque garment bag. In his right hand, he held a sleek black leather portfolio. "It is time, Madison," Richard said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that commanded absolute authority. He walked into the living room and carefully laid the garment bag across the sofa. He unzipped the dark fabric with a swift, fluid motion. Inside hung a breathtaking custom-made Oscar de la Renta gown. It was a masterpiece of deep midnight blue silk, intricately structured to project raw power and undeniable elegance. It was a $20,000 weapon, designed specifically for a woman about to conquer a room full of arrogant men. "You will not be wearing those suburban rags tonight," Richard stated, gesturing to the gown. "You are a Preston. You will look like one." I reached out, running my fingers over the flawless silk. "It is perfect, Dad." Richard did not smile. He placed the black leather portfolio on the glass coffee table and flipped it open. Inside sat a stack of pristine, watermarked legal documents. These were not the fake mortgage papers Derek had signed earlier today. These were heavily guarded, highly classified corporate acquisitions. "Read it," he commanded. I leaned over the table. The top document was a fully executed transfer of ownership. It detailed the complete hostile acquisition of Derek's parent finance company. The anonymous billionaire tech CEO who had orchestrated the ruthless buyout was not a stranger. It was Richard's primary holding corporation. But that was not the hook. I looked at the bottom of the page where the absolute title deeds and ultimate beneficiary rights were assigned. The newly appointed sole managing owner of Derek's entire firm was clearly printed in bold black ink. Madison Preston. "I bought the firm 4 days ago." Richard explained, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold, calculating intensity. "The board of directors reports directly to me, and as of this afternoon I have legally transferred the absolute title deeds into your name. You are not just attending this gala, Madison. You are the guest of honor. You own the building, you own the firm, and you own Derek's entire professional existence." I picked up the heavy legal document, feeling the incredible weight of the power resting in my hands. The abused, financially dependent housewife was dead. The woman standing in this living room was a corporate apex predator armed and fully authorized to destroy the man who had tried to lock her in an asylum. "I will go get dressed," I said, a dangerous thrill lacing my words. "We have a party to crash." While I was stepping into a custom gown worth more than his annual bonus, Derek was standing in front of a gilded mirror in a penthouse suite at the Drake Hotel. He adjusted his silk bow tie, admiring the sharp lines of his jaw and the expensive cut of his jacket. He took a slow, arrogant sip of 18-year-old single malt scotch. In his mind, he was already the senior partner. He had single-handedly solved his firm's liquidity crisis by securing my childhood home, or so he blindly believed, and he was about to spend the evening shaking hands with the anonymous billionaire who had just bought his company. Amber, his 22-year-old mistress, was currently in the master bathroom doing her makeup, completely ignorant to the massive financial crimes funding her lifestyle. Derek checked his gold Rolex. The evening was proceeding exactly according to his immaculate design. 30 miles away, the atmosphere was equally celebratory, though significantly more desperate. DeAndre had rented the premier private dining room at the Oak Brook Country Club. It was a lavish, sun-drenched space overlooking the 18th hole, featuring a private mimosa bar and a sprawling seafood buffet. Patricia was in her element. She wore a bright floral Chanel dress floating between tables of Chicago's wealthiest retirees and bored socialites. She was laying the groundwork, aggressively whispering about her son's brilliant new investment strategy. DeAndre stood at the head of the long mahogany table, projecting an aura of absolute confidence that masked the cold sweat trickling down his spine. He had his tablet propped up on a silver stand, displaying a fabricated dashboard of his decentralized finance fund. He was aggressively pitching a recovery round to a table of 7 new highly susceptible investors. He confidently pointed to a line item showing $80 million in newly acquired commercial real estate backing. He assured them the morning's temporary market dip was a manufactured buying opportunity. He promised guaranteed risk-free returns of 30% by the opening bell on Monday. All they had to do was wire their minimum $500,000 buy-ins before noon. He was so close. 2 of the retirees already had their checkbooks out, blinded by the promise of effortless wealth and Patricia's aggressive social endorsement. The tranquil, affluent hum of the country club shattered instantly. A fleet of 6 matte black Chevrolet Suburbans bypassed the valet, entirely tearing up the immaculate cobblestone driveway and screeching to a halt directly in front of the clubhouse steps. The heavy glass doors of the dining room did not just open, they were forcefully held back by armed federal agents. A dozen men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers with the letters SEC emblazoned in bright gold across their backs marched into the room. They moved with terrifying coordinated precision. The lead agent, a tall, severe woman holding a thick stack of federal warrants, scanned the room and locked eyes with DeAndre. The country club went dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Waiters froze with trays of caviar suspended in the air. The agent marched directly to the head of the mahogany table, flanked by 4 armed officers. She loudly and clearly identified DeAndre by his full legal name, stating she was with the Securities and Exchange Commission executing a federal seizure of all assets associated with his corporate entities. She announced they were investigating massive coordinated wire fraud, embezzlement, and the operation of an unregistered security. DeAndre dropped his tablet. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. He stammered, his face draining of all color. He tried to point at the screen, desperately arguing that his fund was fully backed, that he had just secured $80 million in commercial real estate collateral this very morning. He claimed the documents were stamped by a notary and legally binding. The lead agent let out a sharp, humorless laugh. She informed him loudly, ensuring every wealthy investor in the room could hear every single word, that the offshore holding company he had signed a legal guarantee for was a blacklisted toxic entity currently under federal investigation for international money laundering. She clarified that he had not acquired assets. He had legally assumed $80 million in criminal debt. The wealthy retirees at the table snatched their checkbooks back, staring at DeAndre with absolute revulsion. Federal agents immediately began confiscating DeAndre's phone, his laptop, and the tablet on the floor. Two officers stepped forward, grabbed DeAndre by the arms, and pulled them behind his back. The cold metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent dining room. They marched him out, frog marching the so-called financial genius past the carving stations and out the front doors. Patricia dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the tile, splashing expensive mimosa across her designer shoes. She stood paralyzed, watching her golden boy shoved into the back of a federal vehicle in front of her entire social circle. The humiliation was absolute, suffocating, and intensely public. She scrambled for her purse, her hands shaking violently. She practically sprinted toward the ladies' room, locking herself in a handicap stall. She pulled out her phone and dialed Derek's number, her breath coming in ragged, hysterical gasps. Back in the hotel suite, Derek's phone buzzed on the marble counter. He answered it, annoyed by the interruption. Patricia screamed into the receiver. She was completely incoherent, babbling about federal agents' handcuffs and toxic debt. She demanded Derek fix it immediately. She told him they needed a massive legal retainer and emergency cash for federal bail before DeAndre was processed and sent to a holding cell. Derek rolled his eyes, telling his mother to calm down and stop being dramatic. He assured her he had unlimited access to the firm's capital reserves and could handle a minor regulatory misunderstanding. He placed the phone on speaker, sat down at the desk, and flipped open his encrypted corporate laptop. He logged into his administrative portal, navigating directly to the client escrow accounts he routinely embezzled from. He typed in a transfer request for $500,000, routing it toward a premier defense attorney's trust account. He confidently clicked the execute button. The loading wheel spun for 2 seconds. Then the entire screen flashed a brilliant violet red. A massive error box appeared, blocking out the entire interface. The text was bold and inescapable. Transaction denied. Accounts frozen by order of new ownership. Derek stared at the glowing red pixels on his encrypted laptop, his mind flatly refusing to process the words. Transaction denied. Accounts frozen by order of new ownership. Derek! Patricia shrieked through the speakerphone, her voice shrill enough to rattle the hotel suite's expensive windows. Are you listening to me? The SEC agents are confiscating his cars. They took his passport. Wire the retainer. Derek blinked, forcing his breathing to stabilize. He slammed the laptop shut. He refused to let a minor IT glitch ruin the most important night of his life. The firm had just been bought out. Naturally, there would be a temporary freeze on escrow accounts during the corporate transition. That was standard protocol. It had to be. I cannot wire the funds right now, Mother, Derek said, his voice cold and annoyed. The new ownership locked the internal routing systems for the transition. I will deal with DeAndre's mess tomorrow morning. I have a gala to attend. Tomorrow, Patricia gasped, sounding as if she were physically choking. Your brother-in-law is in federal custody. You cannot just go to a party. I am not going to a party. I am going to my coronation, Derek snapped, straightening his silk bow tie in the mirror. By midnight, I will be a senior partner under a billionaire tech mogul. I will have the authority to bypass the escrow freezes myself. Tell Vanessa to stop crying and meet me at the Drake Hotel. And clean yourself up. You sound hysterical. He ended the call without waiting for her response. He turned to Amber, who was emerging from the master bathroom in a tight sequined red dress that screamed of new money and poor taste. She smiled, oblivious to the fact that her date's family was currently collapsing under federal indictments. Derek offered his arm, projecting the absolute certainty of a man about to conquer the world. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a masterclass in aggressive, unapologetic wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the gilded ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over Chicago's financial elite. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage Dom Perignon. The room hummed with the electric murmur of powerful people desperate to secure their positions under the new anonymous regime. Derek navigated the room like a shark in familiar waters, Amber clinging tightly to his arm. He shook hands with managing directors, slapped rival executives on the back, and confidently boasted about the $80 million in commercial real estate collateral he had secured that morning. He spun it as a brilliant 11th-hour liquidity maneuver that had saved the firm's balance sheets just before the buyout. His colleagues nodded, visibly impressed by his ruthlessness. Derek's ego swelled with every sip of champagne. He was untouchable. "Derek," the desperate, trembling whisper broke his concentration. Derek turned around, his polished smile instantly faltering. Patricia and Vanessa had just breached the ballroom. They looked entirely out of place among the glittering elite. Patricia's usually immaculate hair was frizzy, and her floral Chanel dress was visibly stained with spilled mimosa near the hem. She was shaking her eyes, darting around the room like a cornered animal waiting for federal agents to drop from the ceiling. Vanessa looked even worse, clutching her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were stark white, her face pale and streaked with dried tears. Derek immediately grabbed his mother by the elbow, dragging her and his sister behind a massive, towering floral arrangement to shield their disheveled appearance from the board of directors. "What is wrong with you two?" Derek hissed, his teeth clenched in a furious whisper. "I told you to clean yourselves up. You look like absolute lunatics. The new owner is going to be here any second." "DeAndre is in a federal holding cell, Derek," Vanessa sobbed, her voice trembling violently. "They took the house keys. They froze his personal checking accounts. My credit cards are declining. I had to pay the valet with a $20 bill I found in the bottom of my purse. We have nothing." "Keep your voice down," Derek commanded, looking over his shoulder to ensure none of the senior partners were listening. "I already told you the new ownership locked the internal escrow routing. It is a temporary security measure. Once the new CEO officially names me senior partner tonight, I will have top-tier clearance. I will override the freeze wire, the bail money, and hire the best defense team in the city. Until then, you are going to grab a glass of champagne, paste a smile on your face, and pretend we are the most successful family in this room. Do you understand me?" Patricia swallowed hard, desperately, trying to pull the remnants of her socialite dignity together. "You are sure?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You are sure you can fix this? I am the smartest man in this firm, Mother." Derek stated, his arrogance absolute. "I secured the liquidity. I saved the portfolio. This night belongs to me." Before Patricia could respond, a sharp, piercing sound cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom. A distinguished man in a tailored tuxedo stepped up to the podium at the front of the room and tapped his finger against the microphone. The sharp thuds echoed through the massive speakers, immediately commanding the attention of all 400 guests. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of conversation faded into complete expectant silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming with formal authority, "if I could please have your attention, tonight marks the beginning of a historic new era for this firm. For months you have speculated about the identity of the visionary who engineered this brilliant acquisition. Tonight the mystery ends." Derek puffed out his chest, stepping out from behind the floral arrangement, making sure he was positioned near the front of the crowd. He wanted the new billionaire owner to see him immediately. "Please rise," the MC continued, gesturing toward the back of the ballroom. "It is my profound honor to introduce the sole proprietor, the new owner, and the chairwoman of the board." The massive heavy oak doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open in perfect unison. The crowd turned their breath, catching collectively. The flashing lights of the hired press photographers illuminated the entryway like a localized lightning storm. I stepped into the blinding spotlight. I did not look like the meek, subservient suburban housewife Derek had left sitting on a bed surrounded by trash bags. I looked like an absolute queen. The midnight blue Oscar de la Renta couture gown draped perfectly over my frame, projecting an aura of lethal, undeniable power. My posture was flawless, my chin held high, my expression a mask of cool, terrifying authority. Resting lightly on my arm was Richard. My father looked like a billionaire predator stepping into a room full of prey. His tailored suit was immaculate, his silver hair perfectly styled, his eyes scanning the crowd with chilling precision. "Joining our new chairwoman," The MC's voice boomed over the speakers, is the firm's new chief legal counsel, Mr. Richard Preston. Derek stood frozen in the center of the ballroom. The arrogant smirk literally melted off his face, replaced by a look of such absolute mind-shattering horror that his skin turned the color of ash. His eyes bulged, fixed on me, as I glided down the red carpet toward the podium, commanding the entire room with a single glance. His hand went entirely limp. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It hit the polished marble floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces, the sharp crash echoing perfectly through the stunned silence of his ruined kingdom. The crunch of crystal beneath my father's leather Oxfords was the only sound in the cavernous ballroom as we walked past Derek. I did not stop to look at my soon-to-be ex-husband. I did not offer him a smug smile or a lingering glance of triumph. He was no longer a person to me. He was simply an obstacle I was currently stepping over. I could hear his breath hitching a rapid, shallow wheezing sound as his brain short-circuited trying to process the impossible reality standing right in front of him. Richard guided me up the velvet-carpeted steps to the main stage. The master of ceremonies immediately stepped aside, bowing his head respectfully. The board of directors seated at the VIP tables flanking the podium watched me with a mixture of intense curiosity and profound intimidation. They were sharks, but they recognized an apex predator when they saw one. I stepped up to the acrylic podium. I did not offer a polite corporate greeting. I did not thank them for their time or express my excitement about our new corporate synergy. I unclasped my black leather portfolio, retrieved my encrypted tablet, and plugged the hardline cable directly into the podium's master projection feed. The 3 massive high-definition screens suspended behind the stage flickered, turning a stark, blinding white before snapping into crystal-clear focus. My voice echoed through the ballroom, cold, amplified, and entirely devoid of mercy. "Good evening," I stated, staring directly into the crowd. "My name is Madison Preston. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I am the sole proprietor and chairwoman of this firm. We are going to bypass the traditional welcoming pleasantries tonight. Instead, we are going to conduct an immediate public audit of the senior management team." I tapped the screen of my tablet. The display behind me shifted. A collective sharp intake of breath swept through the ballroom. Projected in 20-foot letters were Derek's internal routing logs cross-referenced with his personal offshore banking statements. "Slide 1, I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. "What you are looking at is the last 18 months of your firm's supposed liquidity crisis. You have been told by your department heads that market fluctuations were draining your escrow reserves. That was a fabricated narrative. The reality is that your prospective senior partner, Derek Wilson, has been systematically embezzling corporate funds to sustain an unsustainable personal lifestyle." I clicked a button highlighting 3 specific transactions in bright, undeniable yellow. He did not just siphon from the top. I continued pacing slowly across the stage so every executive could see the absolute conviction on my face. He drained the employee pension matching funds. He hollowed out the secondary escrow accounts. He routed over $4 million through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. He bankrupted his own department to finance luxury vehicles, bespoke tailoring, and unearned country club memberships. A low, dangerous murmur erupted from the VIP tables. Senior partners were pulling out their phones, their faces twisting with sudden, violent anger as they looked from the undeniable digital evidence on the screens directly to Derek, who was still standing paralyzed in the center of the ballroom. "But embezzlement is boring," I said, raising my voice to cut through the rising chaos. "Embezzlement is a standard white-collar crime. Let us look at something significantly more ambitious." I tapped my tablet again. The screen transitioned. "Slide 2, I commanded. A high-resolution scan of a legal document filled the screens. It was the $80 million corporate debt assumption contract Derek had finalized that very morning. Right next to it was the residential lease agreement he had used as collateral. This morning, Derek Wilson attempted to cover his tracks by acquiring a severely distressed corporate asset portfolio, I explained, projecting my voice to the very back of the room. He believed he was executing a brilliant acquisition. In reality, he legally bound this firm to $80 million of toxic criminal debt belonging to a money laundering syndicate. And to secure this fraudulent transaction, he required a co-signer for the collateral. I zoomed in on the bottom right corner of the document. The digital ink was stark and undeniable. I would like to draw the attention of federal authorities and anyone else currently taking notes to the signature on the collateral line, I said. The name Amber Hayes was projected in massive looping cursive. Amber, who had been standing frozen next to Derek, suddenly let out a sharp, breathless squeak. The blood drained from her heavily contoured face. That signature, I stated loudly, implicates the signer in felony wire fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. Those are federal charges carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The ballroom exploded. Amber did not just panic. She snapped. The realization that her luxury lifestyle had just bought her a 2-decade prison sentence shattered her completely. She spun around and unleashed a primal, ear-piercing shriek directly into Derek's face. She launched herself at him, her manicured nails hooking into his expensive silk lapels. She slapped him viciously across the face, the sharp crack echoing over the roar of the crowd. She screamed that he lied to her, that he forced her to sign, that he ruined her life. Derek stumbled backward, desperately trying to shield his face from her relentless assault, tripping over the shattered champagne glass he had dropped moments ago. "Stop her!" The feral, unhinged scream did not come from Amber. It came from the back of the room. Patricia, entirely unglued by the cascading destruction of her family, charged forward. Her pristine socialite mask was gone. She was a woman who had just watched her golden child dragged away in handcuffs and was now watching her remaining son publicly annihilated. She shoved past a pair of shocked investment bankers, her floral dress tearing on a chair, her eyes locked onto me with pure, unfiltered, homicidal rage. She reached the bottom of the stage steps, raising her hands like claws, screaming my name. She never made it to the first step. 2 massive corporate security guards, built like linebackers and dressed in tactical black suits, intercepted her with brutal efficiency. One guard grabbed her outstretched arm, twisting it sharply behind her back, while the other hooked his arm around her waist. They drove her instantly and forcefully face first into the plush red carpet. Patricia thrashed wildly against the floor, her expensive pearls snapping and scattering across the velvet steps, her high heels kicking uselessly into the air as the guards effortlessly pinned her down. Her shrieks of fury dissolved into pathetic, breathless sobbing as the entire executive board of the Drake Hotel Gala stood up, staring down at the ruined, pathetic remnants of the Wilson family. I unclipped the sleek wireless microphone from its mount on the acrylic podium. The sharp mechanical snap echoed through the cavernous space, a sound as final as a gavel strike. I stepped around the mahogany stand and began my descent down the velvet-lined stairs. The ballroom was completely paralyzed. The only sounds were Patricia's pathetic, muffled whimpers as the security guards kept her firmly pinned to the carpet, and the sharp, rhythmic clack of my heels striking the polished marble floor. The sea of Chicago's financial elite parted instantly. Billionaires, hedge fund managers, and cutthroat executives stepped back, creating a wide, unobstructed path directly to the man who had spent the last 5 years trying to convince me I was nothing. Derek stood frozen in the center of the shattered crystal from his dropped champagne glass. He was hyperventilating. Heavy beads of cold sweat pooled at his hairline and tracked down his pale, ash-colored cheeks. His custom-tailored tuxedo, the armor of his arrogance, suddenly looked like a cheap, ill-fitting costume. He tried to take a step backward, desperately wanting to retreat into the crowd, but his legs absolutely refused to move. Amber had already scrambled several yards away from him, pressing her back against a marble pillar, trembling in pure terror at the federal wire fraud charges now hanging over her head. She looked at Derek not with adoration, but with absolute venomous hatred. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from him. The scent of his expensive cologne was entirely overpowered by the sour metallic stench of his raw fear. He looked down at me, his eyes wide and pleading silently, begging for a mercy he had never once shown me. I did not smile. I raised the microphone to my lips. "You told me to take the bus with my bleeding stitches while you drove your new corporate perk," I whispered into the microphone. My voice was quiet, but the state-of-the-art acoustic system carried every single syllable to the furthest corners of the room. The executives leaning in to listen gasped collectively at the sheer cruelty of the statement. I kept my eyes locked onto his, watching his pupils dilate in terror as I forced him to relive that day. You left me standing on the curb outside the surgical clinic, bleeding through my bandages after delivering your son, because you did not want my hospital gown touching the pristine leather interior of your brand new Rolls-Royce Phantom. You told me the company had provided that vehicle for an executive of your caliber, and that a financially useless dependent like me did not deserve to ride in it. You told me to find my own way back to the suburbs. Derek opened his mouth, his jaw working uselessly. A strangled, pathetic wheeze was the only sound he managed to produce. The managing directors of his firm, the men he had spent years kissing up to, were glaring at him with unfiltered disgust. In the cutthroat world of finance, ruthlessness was expected, but pathetic, cowardly cruelty toward a bleeding mother was an unforgivable social sin. He was entirely excommunicated from their ranks in a matter of seconds. You paraded that vehicle around the city. I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. You used it to court your mistress. You used it to project an image of untouchable wealth and ultimate corporate authority. You thought it was the ultimate symbol of your power over me. I reached into my midnight blue diamond-encrusted clutch. I slipped my fingers past my phone and pulled out a single folded piece of heavy watermarked paper. I slowly unfolded it, holding it up so the bright lights of the chandeliers caught the official state seals stamped across the top. But you didn't read the corporate structure. I stated, my tone dropping to a lethal calm. I took one step closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at the document in my hand. I am the corporation, I declared, the absolute authority of the statement ringing through the silent ballroom. That Rolls-Royce is registered to my personal LLC. You never owned it, Derek. The parent company you thought you were working for simply leased it from my holding group. I watched his chest heave as the reality of his total destitution finally crushed the last remaining fragments of his ego. He had no job, he had no money, he had $80 million of criminal debt, and now he did not even have his prize status symbol. And I just reported it stolen by you, I finalized. Right on cue, the heavy, soundproofed windows of the Drake Hotel Grand Ballroom began to flash. Brilliant strobing patterns of red and blue light reflected off the crystal chandeliers and danced across the marble walls. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the quiet night air of downtown Chicago, growing rapidly louder, multiplying in number until the noise surrounded the entire building. The Chicago Police Department had arrived. Derek spun his head toward the flashing windows, his entire body trembling violently. He looked back at me, his face twisting into a mask of absolute broken desperation. He dropped heavily to his knees, ignoring the sharp shards of broken crystal cutting into his tailored trousers. He reached out his shaking hands, hovering inches from the hem of my Oscar de la Renta gown, too terrified to actually touch the silk. "Madison, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, humiliating sob. "Please, I am the father of your child. You cannot do this. I will sign anything you want. I will give you full custody. Just call them off. Please." I looked down at the man who had spent half a decade systematically trying to destroy my sanity. I felt no pity. I felt no hesitation. I simply felt the satisfying, absolute weight of closure. I stepped back, ensuring my gown remained immaculate. "Security," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing with finality. "Please escort this thief to the lobby. The police are waiting to process his arrest." Two guards instantly stepped forward, hoisting Derek off the floor by his armpits. He did not fight back. He hung between them like a broken rag doll, weeping openly as they dragged him out of the ballroom, his polished shoes dragging uselessly across the marble. As the heavy oak doors swung shut behind Derek, sealing his fate, I turned my attention back to the room. The absolute silence remained thick with awe and a healthy dose of fear. The titans of industry who had previously dismissed me as a non-entity were now sitting rigidly in their chairs, acutely aware that the balance of power in Chicago had just violently shifted. I walked back up the velvet stairs, my movements fluid and unhurried. Richard stood by the podium, his posture projecting immense pride. He did not need to say a word. His presence alone validated my total authority. I stepped back to the microphone, looking out over the sea of highly expensive suits and stunned faces. Amber was still cowering by the marble pillar, desperately trying to shrink into the shadows. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at her. "You have exactly 10 seconds to exit my building before I have you arrested for trespassing," I announced. Amber gasped, hiking up her sequined dress, and sprinted for the nearest service exit, pushing past a waiter in her frantic desperation to escape. I then looked down at Patricia, who was still pinned to the carpet by my security team, her face smeared with ruined makeup and tears. "Release her," I commanded. The guards stepped back instantly. Patricia scrambled to her knees, gasping for air. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror, finally realizing that the woman she had abused for years now held the power to obliterate her entire bloodline. "Your son, DeAndre, is currently sitting in a federal holding cell," Patricia, I stated coldly. "Your other son is currently being loaded into the back of a police cruiser. And your country club membership has just been permanently revoked by the board, effective immediately, pending an investigation into your involvement in soliciting fraudulent investments on their property. I suggest you leave before I decide to audit the rest of your assets." Patricia did not speak. She hauled herself to her feet, her posture stooped and broken, and stumbled out of the ballroom, a disgraced ghost fleeing the scene of her ultimate ruin. I turned my gaze back to the executive board. Now that the trash has been successfully taken out, I said, a razor-sharp smile finally touching my lips. "Let us discuss the future of this firm." Before I could even outline my restructuring plan, the heavy oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom burst open for a third time. The wail of sirens outside the Drake Hotel, which had previously been a distant, muffled hum, suddenly amplified into a deafening, inescapable roar. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed violently through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting frantic, strobing shadows across the crystal chandeliers and the terrified faces of the executives. A dozen uniformed Chicago police officers marched into the room in perfect, intimidating formation. They were flanked by 4 federal agents wearing the exact same stark SEC windbreakers that had just raided Patricia's country club brunch. The sheer show of force drained whatever remaining oxygen existed in the room. The elite financial players scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the silk-lined walls, desperate to distance themselves from the blast radius of the Wilson family's impending destruction. The federal agents were not empty-handed. Dragged between 2 massive officers was DeAndre. He was practically unrecognizable. The smooth, arrogant cryptocurrency fund manager who had spent the morning swindling affluent retirees was entirely gone. He looked completely hollowed out. His bespoke suit jacket was ripped at the shoulder seam, his silk tie hung loosely around his neck, and his wrists were secured tightly behind his back in heavy steel handcuffs. He kept his head down, refusing to make eye contact with the crowd of high-net-worth investors he had spent months trying to court. The agents marched him directly to the front of the stage, parading the so-called financial genius like a captured prisoner of war. The lead detective, a grizzled man with a stern, unforgiving expression, stepped forward. He held a thick stack of manila folders tightly in his right hand. Behind him, the 2 corporate security guards who had hauled Derek out moments ago returned, forcefully shoving my soon-to-be ex-husband back into the ballroom. Derek was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as his eyes darted frantically between the police, the federal agents, and his disgraced brother-in-law. The detective raised a piece of paper. "Derek Wilson," he announced, his voice echoing off the marble floors with absolute authority. "I have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest. You are being charged with 3 counts of corporate embezzlement, felony wire fraud, and grand theft auto." Derek's knees buckled. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak escaped his throat. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face, or a senior partner who would vouch for him. Every single executive turned their back. He was a highly radioactive asset, and nobody in the cutthroat world of corporate finance was willing to catch the fallout of his monumental stupidity. Furthermore, the detective continued, reading from a secondary document. "You are being charged with aggravated forgery in relation to a fraudulent $80 million debt assumption contract. We have secured the digital logs from your firm's servers courtesy of the new ownership. The evidence is entirely conclusive. Across the room near the catering exit, a sharp, violent scuffle broke out. Amber had foolishly tried to slip through the kitchen doors while the police were focused on Derek. A female officer intercepted her, slamming her against the swinging door and swiftly pulling her arms behind her back. "Get your hands off me!" Amber shrieked, her voice cracking in pure panic. "I did not do anything. I am just his date. I do not even know what is going on." "You are Amber Hayes?" the female officer asked coldly, securing her grip. "You are being detained on suspicion of receiving stolen corporate funds and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Your signature is clearly printed on the fraudulent collateral documents." Amber began sobbing hysterically, the heavy contour makeup running down her face in dark, muddy streaks. She abandoned her elegant facade entirely. "He made me sign it," she screamed, thrashing against the officer's grip and glaring across the room at Derek. "He told me it was just paperwork for a new luxury condo. He bought me everything with stolen money. He lied to me. He is a criminal. He ruined my life." The ultimate public betrayal by his young, expensive mistress was the final blow to Derek's fragile, crumbling psyche. The lead detective grabbed Derek's arm, spinning him around and violently slamming the heavy metal cuffs onto his wrists. The sharp, mechanical ratcheting sound echoed loudly through the dead, silent ballroom. Derek collapsed entirely. He dropped heavily to his knees on the cold marble floor, weeping openly. The man who had spent half a decade calling me useless, who had planned to lock me in a psychiatric ward just hours ago to steal my child, was now a blubbering, broken mess at my feet. The complete reversal of power was absolute. "Madison, please," he choked out, looking up at me on the stage, tears streaming down his flushed face. "Please, you have the power to stop this. You own the firm. You control the board. Tell them it was an internal accounting error. Tell them we can settle it privately. I will do whatever you want. I will leave the city. Just tell them to let me go." I looked down at him, my expression completely impassive. I did not feel a shred of pity. I felt nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. He was finally facing the exact reality he had spent years avoiding. "Please," Derek sobbed, his voice cracking into a desperate, high-pitched wail as the detective pulled him upward. "I am begging you. Think of our family. Think of our baby boy. Think of Leo. He needs his father. You have to think of Leo." I walked to the very edge of the stage, standing directly above him. I looked him dead in the eyes, ensuring my voice carried absolute, terrifying finality. I whispered into the microphone, the words cutting through his pathetic sobbing like a scalpel. "That is exactly why you will never breathe the same air as my son again." I released the microphone button, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom swallow the last echoes of my voice. The two corporate security guards dragged Derek's limp, sobbing frame through the massive oak doors, his patent leather shoes leaving dark, erratic scuff marks across the pristine marble threshold. He did not look back. He simply vanished into the corridor, an ousted king stripped of his crown, his kingdom, and his dignity. I turned back to the remaining board of directors. They were sitting completely motionless, staring at me with a profound, terrified reverence. "This meeting is adjourned," I stated flatly, my voice requiring no amplification to command the room. "Expect your new compliance protocols in your inboxes by 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Anyone failing to sign the new corporate ethics mandate by noon will join Mr. Wilson outside. Have a pleasant evening." I did not wait for their nods of submission. I stepped down from the stage, Richard falling smoothly into step beside me. We exited the ballroom and walked down the grand, gilded corridor toward the main lobby of the Drake Hotel. The atmosphere had violently transitioned from a high society gala to a sprawling, active crime scene. The revolving glass doors offered a panoramic view of the street outside, bathed in the chaotic, strobing glare of red and blue police sirens. Outside, the reality of the Wilson family's total annihilation was on full public display. Federal agents were slamming the heavy steel doors of a transport van, securing DeAndre inside for his trip to federal lockup. A few yards away, two Chicago police officers were forcefully pressing Derek's head down to clear the roofline of a squad car, shoving him into the cramped back seat. Standing near the indoor bellhop station, shivering in her torn floral Chanel dress, was Patricia. She was watching her golden child, the son she had worshipped and blindly enabled for over 3 decades, being caged like a common street thug. The sight completely shattered her. The last fragile thread tethering her to sanity and high society decorum snapped. Her pristine socialite mask evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, feral desperation. She spun around and saw me walking calmly across the lobby, her face contorted into a mask of pure, rabid hatred. The tears streaking through her expensive foundation were no longer born of shock, but of violent, unhinged fury. "You?" Patricia shrieked, the sound tearing through the elegant lobby and stopping the remaining hotel guests dead in their tracks. "You malicious, lying parasite." She launched herself across the polished marble floor. She was a woman completely possessed, her hands curled into vicious claws, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She lunged directly at my face, fully intending to physically tear me apart right there in the lobby. She screamed that I had framed her boys, that I was a jealous, worthless nobody who had manipulated the legal system to destroy her perfect family. She yelled that I could never stand to see my betters succeed. I did not flinch. I did not raise my arms to block her. I did not even break my stride. Before her manicured claws could come within 3 feet of me, Richard stepped smoothly and effortlessly in front of my body. He moved with the lethal, practiced grace of a man who had spent his entire career neutralizing threats. He did not raise his fists or adopt a defensive stance. He simply stepped directly into her path, an immovable wall of bespoke wool and terrifying, silent authority. Patricia crashed hard into his chest, bouncing off him like a bird hitting a pane of reinforced glass. She stumbled backward, her ruined high heels slipping on the polished marble floor, gasping for breath as the physical impact knocked the wind entirely out of her lungs. She looked up at Richard, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with furious indignation. "Get out of my way!" she spat, pointing a trembling accusatory finger at me from around his broad shoulder. "She is a monster. She orchestrated this entire charade. My son is a brilliant investment banker, and she is nothing but a jealous, vindictive amateur who ruined his life." Richard looked down at her. His expression was not angry. It was one of profound clinical disgust, the way one might look at an insect scurrying across a dining table. "Mrs. Wilson." Richard set his voice a low, smooth baritone that somehow cut through the ambient noise of the lobby better than her screaming had. "Your son is a federal criminal who will spend the next 2 decades trading his tailored suits for a state-issued jumpsuit. And if you do not lower your voice and step back immediately, I will personally instruct the officers outside to add assault and battery to your family's rapidly expanding list of felony charges tonight." Patricia froze. The cold, absolute certainty in his voice pierced through the thick haze of her hysteria. But her arrogance was a terminal disease. She straightened her spine desperately, attempting to summon the haughty suburban superiority she had wielded like a weapon for years. "You cannot threaten me," she hissed, her voice trembling but heavily laced with defiance. "We are a prominent family. We have endless resources. We have the best attorneys in Chicago on retainer. I will sell my home if I have to. I will liquidate the estate and bury you both in litigation until you are completely bankrupt. You have not won anything." Richard did not blink. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey willingly step directly into a snare. "Your home," Richard repeated softly. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He withdrew a single tri-folded document printed on heavy official legal paper. He extended his arm, holding the document out to her with mocking politeness. "I strongly suggest you read this before making any grand declarations about liquidating assets," he instructed. Patricia hesitated, her eyes darting suspiciously between the paper and Richard's face. Slowly, with shaking fingers, she reached out and took the document. She unfolded it. I watched her eyes track across the bold black lettering stamped across the top of the page. Her jaw went entirely slack. The remaining color drained from her face, leaving her looking sallow and hollowed out. She read the first paragraph, her eyes widening in sheer, uncomprehending horror. "This is a mistake," she stammered. her voice dropping to a frantic, breathless whisper. "This is a typo. My house is completely paid for. Derek paid off the mortgage 3 years ago. He handed me the deed himself. He told me it was a gift. He paid for it in full." She looked up, clutching the paper to her chest as if trying to physically shield her heart from the reality of the printed words. She looked desperately at me, then at Richard, waiting for someone to tell her this was a cruel, elaborate prank. Richard stepped forward, closing the distance between them, invading her space, and forcing her to look up into his cold, merciless eyes. "Did you really think your mediocre son paid off your suburban mansion?" Richard asked coldly. "He used Madison's stolen tech dividends. The house has been foreclosed and my firm bought the debt. You have until tomorrow morning to pack your bags." Patricia stared at the heavy, watermarked paper in her trembling hands, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She did not scream this time. The absolute, terrifying certainty in Richard's voice had finally broken the last remaining pillar of her suburban arrogance. She clutched the eviction notice to her chest, turned her back on us, and shuffled blindly toward the hotel's revolving glass doors. She looked entirely hollowed out, a disgraced phantom fleeing into the flashing red and blue lights of the Chicago night. The sudden quiet in the grand lobby was broken by the frantic, erratic click of high heels. Vanessa stepped out from behind a towering marble column near the concierge desk. She had watched the entire spectacle unfold from the shadows. She had seen federal agents haul her husband DeAndre into a transport van. She had watched Chicago police shove her brother Derek into the back of a squad car. She had just witnessed her mother's ultimate financial ruin. Vanessa's face was streaked with running mascara, but as she approached me, her posture suddenly shifted. The terrified, shaking victim vanished, replaced instantly by a desperate, calculating survivor. She wiped her eyes, threw her shoulders back, and pasted on a look of profound, manufactured sisterhood. "Madison, wait," Vanessa said, her voice breathy and pleading as she stopped 3 feet away from Richard and me. "Please, you have to listen to me." I crossed my arms, looking at her with mild clinical amusement. "I am listening, Vanessa. Make it quick. I have a corporation to run." Vanessa let out a shaky, dramatic sigh, pressing a hand to her chest. "I had no idea." She swore, her eyes wide with fake sincerity. "I swear to you, Madison, I had no idea what DeAndre was doing. He kept me completely in the dark about his cryptocurrency funds. He lied to me every single day. And Derek, what he did to you, what he stole from your firm, it is unforgivable. They are monsters, both of them." She took a tentative step closer, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper, completely willing to throw her entire family under the bus if it meant saving her own skin. "I never supported how they treated you," Vanessa continued, her tone dripping with false empathy. "I was a victim of their control too. They suffocated us both. But you beat them. You are brilliant, Madison. You own the whole firm now, and you are going to need loyal people to help you rebuild it." I tilted my head, studying her desperate pivot. "Loyal people." "Yes," Vanessa nodded eagerly, sensing an opening. "You need people who know the internal culture of the firm, people who can bridge the gap during the transition. I have a marketing degree, Madison. I know all the senior partners' wives. I know the social scene. I can help you rebrand the entire company. Just give me a position. Director of Public Relations, or even just a consulting contract. I will work around the clock for you. I have absolutely nothing left. Tyler froze our accounts. Please, woman to woman, I am begging you for a job." I stared at her. I remembered every family dinner where Vanessa had mocked my clothes every holiday, where she had sneered at my background every single time she had sat at my dining room table and laughed while Derek humiliated me. She had happily feasted on the spoils of their corruption, and now she wanted a paycheck from the woman she had spent years treating like dirt. I let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. "You always did have a terrible habit of signing things you didn't read, Vanessa," I said quietly. Vanessa's eager smile faltered, her brow furrowed in sudden confusion. "What do you mean?" I extended my hand toward Richard. He did not say a word. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and produced a sleek gray legal folder. He handed it to me. I flipped it open and pulled out a thick stack of stapled, highly sensitive financial documents. 2 days ago, I explained, stepping toward her and holding the documents up. DeAndre and Derek finalized a massive commercial real estate acquisition. They thought they were buying prime commercial property downtown. They thought they were securing an $80 million asset to hide their embezzled funds. Vanessa stared at the papers, her breathing accelerating. I do not know anything about their real estate deals. You do not know the details, I corrected, but you certainly knew where to sign. I flipped to the third page of the contract and tapped my index finger against a specific line. When DeAndre structured the holding company to buy that debt, he needed to prove maximum household liquidity to bypass the federal escrow limits. I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the empty lobby. He used your joint accounts. He used your shared marital assets as collateral. And because you trust your husband so implicitly, you co-signed the guarantor forms without reading the fine print. Vanessa's eyes locked onto her own signature at the bottom of the page. The color drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. She took a step backward, shaking her head in violent denial. No, Vanessa choked out. No, he said that was just for a new tax bracket. He said it was just standard joint filing paperwork. It was a joint assumption of liability, I corrected sharply. The property they bought was severely distressed. It is entirely toxic. The shell company they formed is currently defaulting on multiple high-interest corporate loans. And because DeAndre is now facing federal prison, the creditors are going to bypass him entirely and come directly after the co-signer. I took the thick stack of mortgage documents and shoved them forcefully into Vanessa's trembling hands. She grabbed them reflexively, staring down at her own financial death warrant. Under Illinois marital property laws, you share your husband's debts, I explained with a chilling smile. You just assumed $4 million in corporate liability. Enjoy your bankruptcy, Vanessa. Vanessa's jaw dropped. The heavy packet of mortgage documents slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. Her knees buckled entirely, and she collapsed into a pathetic sobbing heap right there in the hotel lobby. I did not offer her a single backward glance. I turned my back on her ruined form and walked out into the crisp Chicago night air, Richard stepping smoothly into place beside me. The systematic dismantling of my abusers was almost complete. There was exactly one loose end left to sever: the family court showdown. Exactly 14 days later, the gilded opulence of the Drake Hotel was replaced by the stark, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the Cook County Family Court. The transition from an untouchable, arrogant investment banker to a federal inmate had been brutally unforgiving to Derek. He sat at the respondents' table, a hollowed-out shell of the man who used to terrorize me. The bespoke Italian wool suits and silk ties were completely gone, replaced by the stiff, abrasive fabric of a neon orange Department of Corrections jumpsuit. His wrists were secured to a heavy waist chain that clinked sharply against the wooden table every time he trembled. His skin was sallow, his hair unwashed and thinning, and his eyes darted around the room with the frantic, cornered energy of a trapped rat. Beside him sat a court-appointed public defender who looked utterly exhausted and entirely defeated. The lawyer kept rubbing his temples, shuffling through a disorganized manila folder, with the distinct lack of enthusiasm of a man who knew he was fighting a lost cause. Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance, a woman renowned for her absolute lack of tolerance for domestic abusers, presided over the courtroom. The sole matter on the docket was the permanent custody of my son Leo. Your Honor! Derek's public defender began standing up and clearing his throat nervously. Despite my client's current and highly publicized legal entanglements, we strongly contest the petition granting sole irrevocable custody to the mother. We believe she is unfit to raise the child safely. Judge Vance lowered her glasses, staring at the lawyer with a deeply unimpressed glare. Counselor, your client is currently awaiting trial in federal lockup for multiple counts of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. What possible grounds do you have to contest the mother's fitness? This was their final desperate play. The lawyer reached into his battered folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. We have documented legally binding proof that Ms. Hayes suffers from severe psychological instability. The public defender stated, his voice gaining a fraction of confidence. I submit to the court a medical power of attorney. This document was executed just weeks ago, granting my client full control over her medical and psychiatric care due to her erratic, dangerous behavior. A woman requiring involuntary institutionalization cannot safely retain custody of a vulnerable child. Derek looked up, a fleeting, pathetic glimmer of hope washing across his pale face. He genuinely thought this was his trump card. He thought he could still reach out from behind bars and drag me down into the dirt with him. I sat perfectly still, my expression a mask of absolute icy calm. I did not need to speak. I simply nodded to Richard, who was standing at attention, directly behind my legal counsel, the disappearing ink. Objection, Your Honor. Richard said, his deep, commanding baritone cutting through the courtroom and instantly neutralizing the public defender's meager momentum. The document the respondent is attempting to submit is a complete fabrication signed under extreme duress and legally void. Richard confidently approached the bench. He asked the bailiff to retrieve the medical power of attorney from Derek's lawyer and place it on the judge's desk. Richard then reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a small, specialized forensic UV flashlight. If the court will allow, Richard requested smoothly. The respondent and his mother physically ambushed my client, threatening to steal her child unless she signed that exact document. However, she utilized a highly specialized thermochromic security pen. The ink is designed to completely evaporate when exposed to standard room temperatures over a 48-hour period. Richard clicked the button on the flashlight. A harsh purple beam illuminated the heavy stock paper. The public defender leaned in, squinting. Derek strained against his chains, his face twisting in sudden panic. The signature lines were entirely blank. The paragraphs detailing the psychiatric hold, the transfer of medical rights, the forfeiture of her bodily autonomy, everything was gone. The paper was completely devoid of any ink, rendering it a useless blank piece of trash. As you can see, Your Honor, Richard stated, clinically turning off the flashlight, the document is invalid. But if the court requires absolute proof of who actually poses a physical and psychological threat to this child, we have further exhibits to submit. The final blow. Richard did not give Derek or his lawyer a single second to recover. He handed a high-resolution digital tablet to the bailiff, who passed it up to Judge Vance. We submit Exhibit B into the permanent record, Richard announced. This is 4K security footage retrieved from the lobby of the Drake Hotel, recorded exactly 2 weeks ago. Judge Vance tapped the screen. The crisp, high-definition video began to play. The courtroom was dead silent as the footage showed Patricia Wilson, dressed in her ruined designer gown, screaming like a rabid animal. The video clearly captured her violently lunging at my face, her hands curled into claws, fully intending to physically assault me in a crowded public space before Richard effortlessly intercepted her. This is the child's grandmother, Richard explained, his voice laced with heavy disgust. This is the environment the respondent intends to subject his son to. A violently unhinged, physically aggressive family dynamic. Derek shrank down in his chair, putting his head in his hands. His public defender closed his eyes and slowly sat back down, completely abandoning any further attempt to argue. But Richard was not finished. He had saved the ultimate kill shot for last. Finally, Your Honor, we submit Exhibit C, Richard said, handing a thick bound ledger to the bench. These are certified forensic financial logs retrieved directly from the respondent's internal banking servers. I looked directly at Derek. He slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting mine. For the first time in his miserable life, he looked genuinely terrified of me. The respondent did not merely embezzle corporate funds to cover his fraudulent margin calls, Richard stated, his voice dropping to a low, furious growl that resonated through the floorboards. When his accounts ran dry, he manually bypassed his own firm's security protocols and raided a private medical escrow account. He explicitly stole the specific earmarked funds that were strictly designated to pay for his own son's life-saving cardiac surgery. A collective gasp echoed from the gallery. Even the bailiff turned to look at Derek with sheer, unfiltered revulsion. Judge Vance stopped flipping through the ledger. She slowly lowered the book, her face hardening into a mask of pure judicial wrath. She looked at Derek not as a citizen, not as a father, but as a parasite. "Mr. Wilson," Judge Vance said, her voice shaking with barely contained fury, "in my 2 decades on the bench, I have rarely encountered a parent so completely devoid of basic human decency. You stole the money required to keep your own infant child alive to fund your corporate gambling." She picked up her gavel. "This court finds the respondent unequivocally unfit," she declared, her voice booming with absolute authority. "I am instantly terminating all of your parental rights. You will have no visitation. You will have no legal standing. You will never approach this child again. I am granting the petitioner sole irrevocable custody effective immediately." The gavel slammed down with a deafening final crack. The sound echoed through the courtroom, sealing Derek's fate forever. The guards grabbed him by the arms, hauling him out of his chair and dragging him back toward the holding cells. He wept uncontrollably, a broken, forgotten man disappearing into the darkness. The echo of my voice faded into the cavernous silence of the ballroom. Derek's pathetic sobbing continued as the lead detective yanked him upward, dragging his dead weight across the cold marble floor. He did not look back. He simply vanished through the heavy oak doors, swallowed by the flashing red and blue police sirens waiting outside in the Chicago night. The Wilson family empire had been utterly obliterated, but there was still one final vital severing required before I could truly be free. 2 weeks later, the gilded opulence of the Drake Hotel was replaced by the stark, unforgiving fluorescent lighting of the Cook County family court. The air in the courtroom was stale, heavy with the scent of floor wax and impending doom. I sat perfectly upright at the petitioner's table, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, my hands resting calmly on the polished mahogany surface. Sitting firmly to my right was Richard, projecting an aura of absolute impenetrable authority. Across the center aisle at the respondent's table sat Derek. The transformation was staggering. The arrogant, slick investment banker who wore bespoke Italian suits and condescended to everyone in his orbit was entirely gone. He was clad in a stiff, abrasive neon orange Department of Corrections jumpsuit. His wrists were secured in heavy steel handcuffs tethered to a thick belly chain that clinked loudly against the wooden table every time he trembled. His skin was sallow, his hair unwashed and thinning, and his eyes darted frantically around the room like a cornered rat. Beside him sat a court-appointed public defender who looked utterly exhausted, rubbing his temples and shuffling through a disorganized manila folder with the distinct lack of enthusiasm of a man fighting a hopelessly lost cause. Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance presided over the courtroom. She was a stern, uncompromising woman, renowned for her absolute lack of tolerance for abusers and legal time-wasters. She peered over her reading glasses, her gaze fixed on Derek with clinical disdain. The sole matter on the docket was my emergency petition for the permanent termination of Derek's parental rights and the granting of sole irrevocable custody of my son Leo. Your Honor. Derek's public defender began clearing his throat and standing up awkwardly. Despite my client's current and highly publicized legal entanglements, we vigorously contest the petition for sole custody. We assert that the mother is psychologically unfit to provide a safe, stable environment for the minor child. Judge Vance raised a highly skeptical eyebrow. Counselor, your client is currently awaiting federal trial for multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand theft. What possible grounds do you have to contest the mother's fitness? This was their final desperate play. The public defender reached into his battered folder and produced a single sheet of heavy legal paper. We have documented legally binding proof that Ms. Hayes suffers from severe psychological instability. The lawyer stated, his voice gaining a fraction of confidence. I submit to the court a medical power of attorney. This document was executed willingly by the petitioner just weeks ago. It grants my client full control over her medical and psychiatric care due to her erratic, dangerous behavior. A woman who formerly required involuntary psychiatric institutionalization cannot safely retain custody of a vulnerable infant. Derek looked up, a fleeting, pathetic glimmer of hope washing across his pale face. He genuinely thought this was his trump card. He thought he could still reach out from behind iron bars and drag me down into the dirt with him. I sat perfectly still, my expression a mask of absolute icy calm. I did not need to speak. I simply nodded to Richard. "Objection, Your Honor!" Richard's deep, commanding baritone cut through the courtroom, instantly neutralizing the public defender's meager momentum. The document the respondent is attempting to submit is a complete fabrication signed under extreme duress and is legally void. Richard confidently approached the bench. He asked the bailiff to retrieve the medical power of attorney from Derek's lawyer and place it flat on the judge's desk. Richard then reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a small specialized forensic UV flashlight. "If the court will allow," Richard requested smoothly. The respondent and his mother physically ambushed my client, threatening to abduct her child unless she signed that exact document. However, my client utilized a highly specialized thermochromic security pen. The ink is chemically engineered to completely evaporate when exposed to standard room temperatures over a 48-hour period. Richard clicked the button on the flashlight. A harsh, bright purple beam illuminated the heavy stock paper on the judge's desk. The public defender leaned in, squinting. Derek strained against his chains, his face twisting in sudden blind panic. The signature lines were entirely blank. The paragraphs detailing the psychiatric hold, the transfer of medical rights, the forfeiture of her bodily autonomy, everything was gone. The paper was completely devoid of any ink, rendering it a useless blank piece of trash. "As you can see, Your Honor," Richard stated clinically, turning off the flashlight, "the document is invalid, but if the court requires absolute proof of who actually poses a severe physical and psychological threat to this child, we have further exhibits to submit." Richard did not give Derek or his lawyer a single second to recover. He handed a high-resolution digital tablet to the bailiff, who passed it up to Judge Vance. "We submit Exhibit B into the permanent record," Richard announced. "This is 4K security footage retrieved from the lobby of the Drake Hotel, recorded exactly 2 weeks ago." Judge Vance tapped the screen. The crisp, high-definition video began to play. The courtroom was dead silent as the footage showed Patricia Wilson, dressed in a ruined designer gown, screaming like a rabid animal. The video clearly captured her violently lunging at my face, her hands curled into vicious claws, fully intending to physically assault me in a crowded public space before Richard effortlessly intercepted her. "This is the child's grandmother," Richard explained, his voice laced with heavy disgust. "This is the environment the respondent intended to subject his son to, a violently unhinged, physically aggressive family dynamic." Derek shrank down in his chair, putting his head in his hands. His public defender closed his eyes and slowly sat back down, completely abandoning any further attempt to argue. But Richard was not finished. He had saved the ultimate kill shot for last. "Finally, Your Honor, we submit Exhibit C," Richard said, handing a thick-bound ledger to the bench. "These are certified forensic financial logs retrieved directly from the respondent's internal banking servers." I looked directly at Derek. He slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting mine. For the first time in his miserable life, he looked genuinely terrified of me. The respondent did not merely embezzle corporate funds to cover his fraudulent margin calls, Richard stated, his voice dropping to a low, furious growl that resonated through the floorboards. When his personal accounts ran dry, he manually bypassed his own firm's security protocols and raided a private medical escrow account. He explicitly stole the specific earmarked funds that were strictly designated to pay for his own infant son's life-saving cardiac surgery. A collective gasp echoed from the sparse gallery. Even the bailiff turned to look at Derek with sheer, unfiltered revulsion. Judge Vance stopped flipping through the ledger. She slowly lowered the book, her face hardening into a mask of pure judicial wrath. She looked at Derek not as a citizen, not as a father, but as a monster. "Mr. Wilson," Judge Vance said, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "In my 2 decades on the bench, I have rarely encountered a parent so completely devoid of basic human decency. You stole the money required to keep your own child alive to fund your corporate gambling." She picked up her heavy wooden gavel. "This court finds the respondent unequivocally unfit," she declared, her voice booming with absolute authority. "I am instantly terminating all of your parental rights. You will have no visitation. You will have no legal standing. You will never approach this child again. I am granting the petitioner sole irrevocable custody, effective immediately." The gavel slammed down with a deafening final crack. The sound echoed through the courtroom, sealing Derek's fate forever. The guards grabbed him by the arms, hauling him out of his chair and dragging him back toward the holding cells. He wept uncontrollably, a broken, forgotten man disappearing into the cold, concrete darkness. I remained seated, feeling a profound, untouchable peace wash over me. My son was finally permanently safe. The story teaches us that true power lies in silent preparation rather than loud declarations. Madison didn't scream or panic when faced with Derek's fabricated evidence. She let her meticulous foresight do the talking. By anticipating their treachery using disappearing ink and securing undeniable financial logs, she dismantled their entire empire of lies effortlessly. It proves that the best revenge against toxic abusers is outsmarting them with clinical precision and unshakable grace, ensuring they engineer their own absolute downfall. Take back your power today by silently preparing for your own success, and share your triumph story in the comments below.